Hello. How you guys doing? So, we're going to start our stream. We're going to talk about some homebrew stuff today. That's kind of our emphasis. I was working on some other stuff for the stream this week, and I was like, I do not have enough time to get this done. So, I pulled some other stuff for us to do in the interim. So, yeah, that's it. So, how's your guys' week been going? We'll wait for a few more people. A few more people are going to work their way in before we get started. So, how's your week going? For me, it's the end of the week. It's alright. It's getting close to the holiday time, so that always feels like everything's just a little extra stressful. At least it does for me every year. So, that's not super fun, but it is what it is. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, busy is primarily the most part. Just doing a lot of stuff, got a lot of stuff going on. But we did play some D&D yesterday, and played some D&D earlier in the week, actually. Because I will not have my usual Sunday game. So we played on Wednesday instead. Let's see, anything else been going on? Oh, we also did a stream on Thursday, in case you missed it. Yeah, we did this for my game that I had yesterday. Sat down, was like, okay, I gotta make a character for this. And it's like, there's no reason why I shouldn't stream this. Nobody's seen me actually really build a character. I mean, I guess you guys have seen me build the solo character. I think I recorded some of that first stream, but it was nice to see me do it for somebody else's game. So actually, I have the relatively completed character sheet. I'm trying to think if there's anything else on here. I'm looking at it right now. Like, hey, was there anything else? I'm actually gonna turn. Oh, yeah, there we go. It's just take a little bit of edge off that blue straight on my face for those lights. I think I got everything. The only thing that I don't have right now that I'm still waiting on, because I forgot to do the thing, was ask my DM about the Celestial and Ignan, about which one would be right. They just got back to me. Let's see. Honestly, both work. More likely Ignan with the desert and stuff. Actually, I'll just respond right now. And asking whether I was going to do Ignan specifically or Primordial as a whole, and I was like, I don't think they do Primordial as a whole anymore. That's one of the weird changes they did in 2024. So like, nope, every Primordial has their own specific language. They don't all speak the same language anymore. They really focus back in, which is an older thing. I'm not really sure if that makes things better. I guess maybe they thought it was like, if everybody can speak Primordial, there's less use of things like tongues or comprehend languages or something like that. They split up everything into... Alright, but that answers that for me. So we can do that real quick. What's they talking about down here? Alright. That's it. And alright, perfect. Oh, we can close that. Doing housekeeping. All right, you know what? I'll just throw you guys over. How about that? And you guys can see the character sheet. This is a character sheet. His name is Oriol, which is sort of like a Corona. I knew I was going to do something light themed because he's going to be a light domain cleric, and something very sun themed, and then obviously being a cleric, something kind of clerical. So I decided to go with Oriol, which is a little bit like a Corona or the Crown of Light or Halo kind of effect. So I always try to pick some sort of name, which is just a fun thing for me, I guess. Nobody else really cares except myself. Where I try to zoom in and be like, oh, let me get something in his name that gives him a little something something. So Oriol is his name. Our son, half-elf. Forester, which again is the person who's in charge of the music at a abbey or priory. I think he's going to be from a priory. I also need to write down some of the got information that my DM has sent over. I haven't done that yet, but otherwise, that's pretty much it. Not much has changed from the end of that. One of the things that has changed, we knew specifically which cantrips I was going to take. So guidance, we knew we were going to get message because that comes from being the half-elf. We're going to get resistance and a sacred flame. Now resistance is kind of a interesting choice. Lots of people not big on resistance. And I thought for level 1, for survivability sakes, I'll probably keep it and then just retrain it as we get some more hit points. But at first level, being able to take a d4 away from a damage type that you know is coming. Especially if it's like, well, we know that we're going to have to run through, like, let's say there's a poison dart trap and we know we're going to have to run past it. Being able to throw resistance on everybody who runs through it, be able to take minus 1d4 poison damage is actually quite useful. But it is an incredibly situational thing, and it does take an action, so resistance is, at least in my mind, oftentimes a more useful out of combat cantrip than an in combat cantrip. I do wish that it wasn't. I either wish that it wasn't concentration, or that it wasn't limited to you can only do the minus 1d4 one time per turn. I mean, honestly, it's not going to come up too much, I guess, because it's oftentimes, unless you were setting off like multiple traps and getting like multiple effects from the same thing. But there are things that, like, if you run through, I don't know, like a fire effect or a burning building or something like that, where you might actually be taking damage based on how far you move in a turn, so you might take it multiple times. You know, that would be a very DM rolling thing. Anyways, all I'm saying is that I took resistance now for that reason, for survivability reasons at like level 1, which we still are. We didn't level up after our first session, which makes sense. We just kind of killed creatures that were probably not evil. What I should say is that members of my party killed creatures that were not probably not evil. But you know, we have a bard who's going to be interesting. They're definitely on the more chaotic, grayish side, and a paladin that wants to do some violence. We'll see whether that changes as we get into it. I think player was saying that it was their first time playing a martial character. I was like, is that true? I guess that is true, at least with us. Like, I guess it is true. He always plays a caster. So it was like, well, it's first session. I gotta break in this new axe. So we'll see how that changes. But yeah, and first session went fine. It'll take a little time to figure out who this character is. I still need to do some of the backstory stuff. I usually do my usual character creation stuff. It's just I didn't really have time to do it this time. And it's helpful sometimes to do that after the first session, after I have an idea of maybe like what the campaign is going to be a little bit more like, the sort of things we might encounter. So I think I'm in a better spot now to do that and have the world map and look at it and figure out stuff then, and information about what is probably going to be his primary god that he has sworn to his cleric. So that'll be interesting. I think I'm going to be in a better position to do that. I think it's probably going to be from like a priory or something like that. That's what makes sense to me. Getting this feeling that he is a cleric from a priory. So like think about a monastery, but it's just a small monastery. But getting this idea going into it that he's kind of he's pretty young, he's pretty youthful, and he's not like a super devout kind of monk, vow of silence kind of guy. He's like, oh, I'm kind of hanging out at the priory and I'm kind of doing the least amount of work that I can. He's kind of lazy. I feel like is kind of what I tapped into. Is that, oh, he's just kind of lazy, and his ideas about, he's more like I want him to be his son, because he's a sun cleric and like domain cleric, to be like a little bit brighter, a little bit more cheery, and a little bit more of a mischievous scamp. So it's like in the first session he did like steal some things, but not in a way that would really do any detrimental damage to something. It was just like, oh, I'm going to steal some alcohol because we're not really going to get paid for this job in coin, and we're going to have to pay for our rooms. So he's like, I'm going to going to take what I can. I mean, as far as I know, that everything down here is lost to them. We did the classic level 1 clear out the cellar. It just ended up being not rats. It ended up being something else. So we did that classic level 1 intro quest, is kill the rats in the cellar. And be like, well, we're not really going to get paid for it because we're leveraging that to get like our guild pins. So instead, take a little something something, because basically they haven't been down here for the better part of a year, so they don't even know what's down here. I was like, I feel like I get some scavenger's rights here. And being like, oh, well, I'll just tap into this big barrel just below the water line, fill up a bottle or two, and then just twist the barrel so it's back above the water line. Because I was like, oh, this seems like something he probably would have done in like the Priory pretty often, where he and maybe a few other acolytes would break into the buttery and be like, oh, well, we're just gonna get a little snifter out of one of these big tons that are sitting in there, big barrels that are in there, and just hang out and have a fun time. So yeah, I mean, this is pretty interesting. We're gonna change in the heroic inspiration a little bit, simply because surprisingly, this is probably the first time in me playing 5e 2024, so in 10 to 11 years, so we have a significant portion of the group that is human. So we have 2 humans in the group, 1 half-elf and a dwarf. So actually, the first time in a very, very long time, it feels like a really, really standard adventuring party, like very tropey fantasy adventuring party in that sort of Western tradition. And we don't have a bunch of weird different things, like we don't have any tabaxi or even Dragonborn or even anything like that. It's just like, oh, there's Middle Earth-ish kind of stuff, and so it makes sense to me. It's a nice change, but what that means is that this heroic inspiration thing. So the humans get heroic inspiration when they finish a long rest, anyways. So I'm like, oh, so I already only have 1 ally I can give it to, and so I talk to the DM and be like, hey, can I give the second one to myself since my allies can't use it? And we'll have to see what happens, because then obviously once we get up to 5th level, if we end up going that far, you never know whether the campaign could fizzle out. If we go or the group falls apart, or who knows what happens. Who knows what happens in the future. I can't scry the bones. But since we don't know what that's going to be, it'd be like, I'll have to probably have another discussion once we hit level 3, because it'd be like, I'm going to get 1 more person I can give, or hit level 5, because our proficiency will go up to 3. I'll be, all right, I have 1 more heroic inspiration, and I have nobody I can still give it to. So this was a cool idea, but I hadn't considered, and this is just a thing that you get for this, for being, for taking that like entertainer feature of the background, I believe. And like, it's just a weird thing, and be like, oh yeah, but I guess if you actually do have humans in your party, this power is actually extremely less useful. I mean, you still get to give it out a short rest, which is cool. So as a group, it's just like, just burn through the heroic inspiration, guys, because we can always get them back. We can get them back multiple times a day, depending on how many times we take a short rest, which is nice to have a couple of advantages in your pockets, or a way to get out of disadvantage in your pocket. Really nice. But that's it. There's nothing else going on with this character right now. So go find it. Today's going to be very much kind of a talking heads video, so very much, I'm going to be real honest, it's going to be kind of like second screen content. I mean, of course, I'm not going to stop you from watching my beautiful face as we talk about this, but in general, there's not going to be a ton to look at. We're gonna look at popular D&D homebrew stuff and house rules and take a look at those. So there's not going to be a lot of visual aspect to it. We're just going to talk about it a little bit. And I guess without further ado, we'll just go ahead and hop in. Hold on. I said without that, and then I was like, and immediately hold on, because I'm going to do something. Let me just gotta check this real quick. Yeah, no, this all looks correct. Okay, yes, we are good. All right. All right. So, homebrewing and house ruling, it's what helps kind of make every D&D table that you play at especially if you, which you might not know this if you only ever played with one group, but if you play with multiple groups, you'll realize that every group plays D&D a little bit different. They don't all play it the same. It's always individually by the people who are there at the table and what they want to get out of the game and sort of everybody's personality is there. And of course, a big portion of that is the dungeon master themselves, and they are the people who pretty much get the final big rubber stamp as to, yes, we're going to do this homebrew. No, we're not going to do this homebrew. Yes, this will be in the game. No, this will not be in the game. This will be like, are we going to use encumbrance? Are we not going to use encumbrance? Etc., etc. We're going to track ammunition. Are we not tracking ammunition? Are we going to do really any exploration at all, or is it just going to be mostly fighting? And is there going to be a lot of heavy role play? Is there not a lot of role play? All those things. It's like every time that we do that, every table will look at the basic rules of D&D and be like, there are things that I want to tweak and I want to change, and maybe that I played something in a different game that I thought did this, replicates this sort of vibe or theme or what I'm trying to evoke through the gameplay better than D&D does. So, you know, you basically strip out what's there, you bolt on some new mechanics, and D&D is very much a DIY thing. It's always been a DIY thing. So, to think about doing homebrewing and house ruling, if we flip the perspective a little bit, if we think about it instead of how do we make our game the best game for us, we can flip that perspective a little bit and consider that each group, especially their dungeon master, is in a way sort of like a modder for a Bethesda game, or oftentimes we're doing our best to turn a janky release into a fun, sometimes even playable product. Because I think we all have those things where we look at where some of the homebrew or house rules are so ubiquitous, like they're so popular and they're so consistent that it's like, well, the game should have probably just done this. And it's very interesting as you go through the development and looking at the release and being like, you guys spent all these years on it, and you obviously did a bunch of play testing. It seems weird that this kind of slipped through the cracks or you didn't implement it, and then try to look at it and be like, is there a really particular reason why you're doing that or not? So, yeah, I thought we have a decade behind us of 2014, and we're got a full year in the can of 2024. I thought it would be a good time to take a look at some of that most popular, that most ubiquitous D&D homebrew and house rules that have kind of come up. Take a look at like what's good and what's bad, and where do we kind of go from here? What's going to be maybe our next iteration? And as we go through them, I'm going to toss in some of my favorite homebrews and house rules, fuel that fire as well as we go through it. So, without further ado, we can go ahead and get into it. Now, this list that I pulled and put together is not in any particular order. So there are things that, most of these are going to be really, really popular. You're probably going to have heard of most of these, if not all of these, as we go through them. So there shouldn't be too many surprises here, but I'm going to kind of give my take on it, whether I think it's good homebrew or bad homebrew or house rules, or what I change, or why I use this, or why I don't use this, or why I use this, maybe this other thing instead, or maybe I don't like what it's replicating, etc., etc. You'll see. Or, rather than explain it, why don't we just kind of jump into it? So I think the first thing we're going to talk to here, let me look at the list. Bonus action potions. So bonus action potions. So in 2014 rules, full action to drink a potion. And this was so popular, it was such a popular homebrew that it became the official action economy in 2024, is that, hey, you can drink a potion as a bonus action. So it's good enough that, so it's nice to see, specifically from the D&D brand, from WotC, this like, if things are popular enough, they can make their way into being an official rule change. I think there was enough complaints about it because the action economy of potions didn't make a lot of sense in the 2014 one. Let's say that you're a third level character and you're like, okay, I'm down to half my hit points or whatever. I'm going to pull out a standard healing potion and I'm going to take it as my action, and I get, let's say I get the very average back, so I'm going to get 7 hit points back. Great. Next turn comes up. The hobgoblin hits me for 8 points of damage, which is pretty standard. And you go, well, alright, so that was kind of a waste of an action, and I'm right back to where I was. I didn't really gain any ground. I just kind of like made a delay of 1 round. And in that 1 round, I'm not any closer to killing this enemy than I was before, or dealing with this threat. Is probably how we should say it. Dealing with this threat, resolving this threat than I was before. All I did was keep myself alive for 1 more turn, but in that turn, the only time that I bought myself was the time that it took me to take the potion to keep me alive. So the action economy is like, well, that's really funky to be like, oh, well, you can keep yourself alive by just quaffing potions every turn, but you're never going to change the situation you're in by doing that if you have to use your entire action to do it. So that is pretty common. Obviously, it was very popular to be like, I'd rather be able to quaff a potion as a bonus action and then still have my action to attack or cast another healing spell or drink another potion if I need to, or make an attack or do something. So it doesn't feel like you burned your whole turn to give yourself a few hit points that this monster is probably going to take away from you before it's your next turn anyways. Now, of course, every once in a while, the monsters miss. But the way that D&D's math works is that they will, unless you have a real high AC, they're going to hit you quite often. So you are, again, mostly just delaying the inevitable there at that point. You're just keeping yourself alive, but you're not gaining any ground by doing it. So, like a lot of people, I use this in my campaigns, both in the ones that I play and in the ones that I run. I think it's a good rule. And like a lot of other people, is that I also take it a step further, and I'm a bit surprised that this didn't make it into the official 2024 rules, as far as I can tell. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's in the 2024 rules, is that in addition to quaffing a potion, like a healing potion, now it could be any potion, but this primarily most of the potions that we drink are healing potions in most games. So drinking a healing potion, roll the dice, but if you take a full action, if you use your primary standard action to drink the potion instead, you get the max healing out of it. You don't have to roll for it. And I like this variant. I think it means that, hey, if there's a reason, if you really need the hit points, it really sucks to roll like 2 1s on the healing potion and be like, cool, I spent my, and that was really bad when it used to be an action. Spent my action to do it and I get 4 hit points back, and it's like, great, I'm definitely going to go down next turn anyway, so I really should have just attacked instead. If you're really relying on the healing potion hit points. But if you, like I said, if you have 2 healing potions, you're like, I'm going to take one as my standard action, I'm going to get the full 10 out the gate, and then as my bonus action, I'm also going to drink a second potion, and I'll roll for that and probably get 7 hit points back. Be like, okay, well, that's getting 17 hit points back in an action feels like a good use of a turn, especially in low levels. Like a 3rd level character, that's a bunch of hit points. That's going to be most of your hit points going through, if not all of your hit points back, depending on, you know, your hit points and your hit die and how you roll them, the size and how well you roll between levels, or if you take the average or whatever. So I do like that. And there are some people that are like, oh, well, that feels a little bit too powerful, especially if you can do that 1-2 punch when you're drinking potions. And I can understand that point of view. I believe that my answer to that is that, hey, there's nothing that's going to keep your bad guys from also having the same access to potions. It's one of the things that doesn't come up in D&D a lot. Definitely not one of the things that the DMG kind of tells you about, like, items is like, you can just give the bad guys healing potions. Like, any sort of humanoid bad guy can have a healing potion or some other way to heal themselves. And especially because a lot of bad guys don't always have a lot of bonus actions. They're like, hey, and that's maybe just a mechanic that you could build in if you wanted to make a custom stat block where you do one of those 1d6 rolls and be like, hey, and if you roll every turn that you come up, you make it a recharge roll. If you roll a 6, the person's got a healing potion on them, and they click off pop off the cork, and chug a lug as a bonus action while they're fighting you. And then that way it'd be like, hey, if you slay this enemy or you take them down, they're gonna have at least, I don't know, like one, depending on what level you are, I would determine like how many healing potions they might have on them. But be like, they're gonna have at least one healing potion on them probably, or at least there's gonna be a chance that they didn't drink all their healing potions. And then if you leave it as a recharge, it's like there is the chance that they could drink it every round, but it's highly unlikely that they will. And then that way you don't have to be like, how many do I give them? And then if I give this bad guy 6 healing potions, and the party figures out how to knock him out or stuns him immediately, and I don't necessarily want to give immediately my group of characters 6 healing potions right out the gate, if they can like stun this guy and just rip it off of him. So that's why I like the recharge, and then making like a loot roll basically for it at the end to see how many this person might have on them, and the answer might be 0. Then maybe they drink them all at that point. So yeah, that's how I think about bonus action potions. I think it's a great house rule. I think it's better. It's good enough that it became the official 2024 rule. I think it's much better. I had been playing with bonus action potions since before 5th edition, because I'm pretty sure. Did you use a minor action for you? I can't even remember anymore. No, I think you had to take your action for it. I think. I remember that we didn't use. I felt like we didn't use a lot of potions in 4E, which would make sense if it was like your major action. Yeah, I think maybe we didn't. Anyways, we're getting off topic. Let's move on to the next one. So the next one is hidden or secret death saving throws. And I think this is a good place to talk about it. I think it's very important when you're choosing what homebrew you want to do, or what house rules you want to implement, that you, especially as a dungeon master, player as well, but especially as the dungeon master, because it is your game, you understand the effect or the behavior that you are trying to model at the table. So 5e24 players are very, and I don't think that it's certainly not a hot take, that they are very blasé about party members going down, knowing they typically have many rounds before they need to act on an ally that's down to ensure that they don't permadie. And by the kind of rules it's written, there's nothing that says like, hey, don't share this with your party, which means like every other roll, whether it's attack rolls, is that's generally just kind of done in the open. So even without investigating that your ally has gone down, you know, oh, they have one, they just went down, so they definitely can't die before the next turn unless somebody comes over and hits them. And we know in most games as dungeon masters that we're not like, well, the orc stands over you and just like brings their axe down on your head and kills you. So automatically 2 failed death saves. Generally we don't do that because, is it sporting? No. Is it particularly fun? No. It can be thrilling, especially if it's but that's something we usually save for like named bad guys, real nasty dudes. Those are the ones that we're usually like, anyways, they knocked you down when your party member's down, and then they just stab them again while they're down to try to take them out of the fight. And then that's usually when, you know, that threat escalation is like, oh, the fight's kind of going okay, it's going okay, and then it's like, whoop, nope, things are going real bad. That big jump and be like, okay, we got to take this really seriously when somebody goes down. So to combat that blasé thing, that is the intent of doing these hidden death saves, to be like, you don't know because you're not actively inspecting this downed ally of yours to determine what state they're in. You know, all you know is that they are not stabilized. So this is a rule that I am currently using in the campaign I'm running, and I like it because it does 2 very specific things. I ask the player to keep the death save secret. I don't want to know what they are. Sometimes it's like, oh, you share it with the DM, but none of the players. I don't care. This is for me, and this is something that I picked up a long time ago. I think from, where did I pick it up from? maybe the angry GM way back in the day. This idea is like, because the game that D&D is now, this more collaborative storytelling kind of, and that's where players are most of the time, or unlike older editions where it's like, oh, the lights are pretty cheap and fast, and you die fast, and it's not that big of a deal. You don't really get too attached to any specific character. And there is an inverse ratio that I see specifically in D&D is that how okay you are with the death of the character depends on how long it takes you to build the character. So in like an OD&D, it takes like 5 minutes to build a character. You roll some dice, you fill in some blanks, and you roll on some equipment, and then you're done, and you're back in the fight. By the time that they have finished the fight and they move on to the next room, you can jump back in, and the dungeon master can be like, oh, well, you find this guy tied up in the next room. Super simple. It's very dungeon heavy, so it's very easy to just toss a guy who's tied up in a room. Very easy to do. But if you look at contemporary D&D, you know, 3rd edition going forward, where it's like, oh, building a character is something that takes... Technically, yeah, you can build it in just a few minutes. But most people take, like, as we saw in my previous stream, hours to build a character. Even a first level character takes me hours because I'm very methodical and I think about it, because I assume when we're going into a long running campaign that I want this character to have a lot of ideas about the RP and who this person is and how they fit in the world and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of investment. So there's more investment in it, which means that I don't want that character to just get blinked out. So that's that inverse relationship. So when it's really easy to make a character and jump back into the game, that's not that important. And this logic tracks with video games too. So you'll see in video games where death is super, super common, respawns are like that, and checkpoints are often, so you don't lose too much progress. Compared to games that are maybe more narrative or something that maybe the autosave feature only happens like once every 10 minutes or something like that, and you can be like, oh, I actually lost like an entire side quest I did. Now you have to go back and do that thing. And then you're like, well, that makes me really not want to try out a lot of different things. Like, I really want to play much more safely, because I'll lose so much more if I get knocked out, which is a very sort of almost Dark Souls approach, right? Because you get Dark Souls and you get knocked down and you're like, oh, I lost my gear, now I have to go get my gear. So there is this penalization when you die. So that's the first part I like, is that I like that part, because if the player is in control of it, if they feel like, I don't want to die to this random orc ambush, random encounter that we had on the road, I'm just gonna, if they need to fudge that, that's okay with me. I'm not complicit in it. If you need to do it, it's okay. You just do it. Don't tell me it. Don't ruin my immersion. I will just assume that you do it. So there are a lot of players that don't, and you see that a lot on online discussions about death and death saving throws, and people being like, oh, it's too hard to kill characters. It's like, well, that's the reason, is because it takes so long to build a character, and you're gonna, the premise of the game now is that you're going to spend so much time with this character that you don't want to lose them to some sort of random encounter, because you have a lot of investment in that character. So that's the first part I like about it. Or if you're tired of playing this character, or you don't like them, or you're the sort of person that's like, hey, whatever I roll is whatever I roll, which I tend to be more that kind of person. It's like, hey, if they die, they die. Their story ends. I get to make a new character. That's cool too. Or you're the sort of person that's like, I'm tired of playing this character. I have a new character concept I want to play. So I'm just going to say that they roll natural 1, and if nobody pops them back up, then they're just going to die. All of that's perfectly fine with me. It's your character. You get, if you want to exit them out and bring somebody else in, that's perfectly fine. The second thing I like about it is that without that transparency at the table, the player character's allies have to stabilize. They know that they have to stabilize that PC before their second round of death saves comes up, to ensure they don't die. Because if they don't know what's happened, you always kind of have to assume that on that first death saving throw, they roll a natural 1. There's always a chance that they have rolled a natural 1 and you don't know that. Or that they're going to roll a natural 1 on their second death save. Remember, there's still a 5% chance on each one of those rolls that can happen. Is that a small percentage? Yeah, but if you've been playing the game very long, you know it comes up. It does come up, and it doesn't feel great when it comes up most of the time. Like, ooh, this is bad. Especially if that's not how especially if they roll the natural one to take their second and third death saving throws, because they're probably thinking they're safe, and then there's like, nope, I guess I'm just dead. So, being like, it puts that onus on the allies that not knowing is going to push them into action, as opposed to the standard way of play, which is that everybody knows where you are in their death save, so oftentimes people will be like, well, I'm just going to attack this guy, and then next round I'll heal you, or whatever. And so I don't like that, so that's why I do the secret death save mechanics. It's because of those two reasons that I really like the way they inform how we play the game, which is one of the primary things that I look for the game thing. Same thing with the bonus action is like, it feels crappy when I'm a player, when I'm like, I have to use my whole turn to quaff a potion. It's like, if I have to spend my whole action to drink a potion, I should at least get the full amount of hit points back. It really sucks to roll low on a healing potion when you use your action to do it. So instead of just be like, yeah, get the max. You take the time, and I think it works narratively in the universe too. When you're like, oh, you spent the full 6 seconds being like, you got every single last drop out of that healing potion bottle, as opposed to like a bonus section where you're just like swigging on it, and you know you've probably got half of it in your mouth and half of it on you because you're in the middle of a fight trying to do other stuff and you're whipping around. So I mean, it makes sense to me in world. It makes sense to me why you would choose one or the other, and gives you an option as to what you want to do. I think it's a good house rule. Just like with the secret death saves, it does what I want to do. Allies see you go down, they don't know what status you're in. They need to either stabilize you, which then again makes Spare the Dying an actual useful spell. If you're like, I just need to stabilize them right now, I don't necessarily want, we're right at the end of the combat or whatever it is, and maybe I don't want to throw a healing word on them, I can just Spare the Dying them, and we can finish out the fight, and then we'll deal with them. But I know for certain they are not going to go down, because if you're further on in the fight, you might be like, we only have a little bit of fight left. And once we get out of that, we can take a short rest and you can spend hit dice or whatever. There's reasons that you might not want to use a healing spell towards the end of combat like that. If you're a more, I was going to say economical, but that is more of an optimizing kind of play. If you are that kind of player, which is me sometimes, I think about that. Do I still stock Spare the Dying? No, generally not. But I would often take the healer feat. I very often take the healer feat, especially the 2014 one, which is very, very good. The 2024 one really, really nerfed the crap out of that, unfortunately. So I think the next one I want to talk about is lingering injuries. So we saw a thing. So a lot of this obviously does with hit points. Manipulating hit points. Bonus action potions, like how can you get hit points back quickly, get more of them back. Secret death saves, like are you going to go down? And the lingering injuries is also a KO kind of mechanic. And this is also something that I am using in my current campaign. Though my players are not good about reminding me about it, I have to be the one who does it. And I do miss it all the time. I forget about it because I try not to knock them down every single combat, though sometimes that does happen. But once I started adjusting how I was doing the combat encounters and what I was putting into it, they're going down less. It was at a point where most of them were going down every combat, and then the lingering injury started to stack too much. I was like, all right, I can't do that, or we won't get anywhere in the game. So I had to let that go for a little bit. So now I'm trying to hit the throttle back on it and be like, okay, when you go down, now we will start reinstating this. So this is basically what happens. If a PC gets KO'd, they get knocked out, go to 0 hit points, go into death saves or whatever, there is some lingering injury they pick up for that. So the effect that I want to model, that's what we talked about, it's like when you're looking at this homebrew or house rules, is like, what are the things that I want to encourage? What is the type of play that I'm trying to encourage? The effect that I want to encourage is to avoid the extremely common that we were just talking about, that 5e 2024, pop up, take your turn, get knocked back down. Chumbawamba, tub thumper kind of thing. That gameplay loop where you're like, which is the D&D problem where it's like you are just as effective at 1 hit point as 100 hit points. So being like, okay, well, there should be this, it feels like there should be a consequence for you being knocked out of the fight multiple times. And so here's my idea is like, hey, you go down to 0 hit points. I have a hit location die, one of those D12s that shows you where you get hit. You roll that. You take a condition or some other similar effect that's flavored for the type of the injury that you take. And then, if you're familiar with the channel, you've seen me use the resource die. I really like the resource die mechanic, so I use it for that to basically do a wind down for how long this injury will last. Generally for multiple sessions. The idea is that, hey, if you give it like medical attention or you take extended rest to deal with these injuries, extended like long rests where you're basically taking pseudo downtime. If you're like, well, we put the wizard in the back of the wagon and they do nothing but lay in the back of the wagon while we're traveling. It's like, okay, when that sort of stuff happens, when you come up and you have to do the resource die, which is every long rest, you're going to roll for it. And if you're doing that medical attention, you're going to roll with disadvantage, which is good in this case because you're wanting to roll a 1. Usually it's bad. In this case, you're wanting to roll a 1 because you're wanting to go from that D6 down to that D4 and go from a D4 down to 1 and then down to 0 and be completely healed. So here's an example that happened in my current campaign, the first time that we got to use this actually. A PC tries to climb up into a tree, a tall tree. They're trying to get a perspective on something. Anyways, they fumble it out. I have them basically kind of roll for how high they are up at the tree when they completely screw up their athletics. They end up being quite high. They fall out of the tree. They get KO'd by the fall. But we roll on the hit die location and be like, okay, it's your leg. And be like, you took a bunch of damage, and it's a fall that knocked you out. So in my mind, that means that you have a broken leg. Alright, you broken leg to me feels like, alright, so for the time being, you are slowed. Because you have a broken leg. And you have disadvantage on dex saving throws to basically be nimble and kind of get out of the way. Because, you have a broken leg. Until you get it healed. And you know what? I think it works out pretty well. This is one of those things where the game that I play, the style of game that I want to play is often, or run, is a little bit more, it's not like super grimdark, but it is a little bit more nitty gritty where I really have to fight against the 5e 2024 system a little bit. Just because 5e 2024 kind of sets player characters up to be, even at level 1, essentially superhuman coming out of the gate. They are the best and brightest of anybody who lives. Like, if you look at a commoner stat block and you look at a first level player character stat block, you're like, these things are almost entirely different creatures. One of them's got 10s and everything, and one of them's got like maybe a 10. And they're better at almost everything else. And they're they're proficient in way more things, and armor and magic, and so you get this effect that like they are so superhuman, they are so above the normal person that, and I think you see that in the way that the game plays for most people, where they're like, oh, well, we kick in the door and just immediately start killing things because we are so powerful that the concern for our own mortality is not very present. And so the lingering injuries helps me kind of tamp that back down and be like, yes, you are far and away above the average person, but you are not some godlike being. Like, you are still very much mortal people. You're just very, very talented and naturally gifted mortal people. So, hey, if you fall out of a tall tree, there's still a chance that you're going to break your leg. And unlike obviously the commoner, if we had had that level 0 commoner, CR0 commoner that had fallen out of that tree, they'd just be like dead. They took enough damage that they would just be dead. dead. You'd be like, oh, you watch this guy fall out of a tree and snap his neck as he hits the ground. And he doesn't move. And you go, ooh. Okay. So instead of dealing with that, you're like, oh, well, you fall out of your leg. It's real nasty. You got, a bone sticking out of your skin. And they have to reset it and figure out how to get you on a litter and get you out of here and get you back to town and start trying to get you medicine and try to heal you up and get you crutches or whatever so you can still move around. Still do some sort of adventuring with them. And of course, because it's the pacing, because we're playing more of a hex crawl kind of game, I feel like you guys take a lot more time to go places because you got old Hop Along here who fell out of the tree, who's taking a lot of time. Unless you guys get him a mount or cart or some other way that you can move him at your speed. Otherwise, or you leave him behind. And he gets left behind. So yeah, that's why I like the Lingering Injuries rule. It's a cool house rule. I added in because it fits the flavor of the game that I'm trying to emulate. Now, if you're playing a very kind of bog standard 5e 2024 game, and that's what your players are interested in, you and your players are interested in, that's definitely not a house rule for you. That's not going to be one that you're going to find enjoyable. You have to have a little bit of a sadism masochistic streak to be like, I kind of want the game to be a little bit rougher around the edges, a little bit harder, things just a little bit tougher. Especially when you're looking at things that are outside of combat. So that's why I like the Lingering Injury. Next one, which is more... This next one is less of a specific house rule or homebrew, and a little bit more of a, I guess, dungeon master philosophy or style of game. I guess a style of running maybe is how you would talk about this, because I think that you either find dungeon masters. This can be a very quite divisive one, and that is the rule of cool, or basically using narrative flavor over the rules of the game as they are written or as they are intended. Now, me, personally, I can be a little bit of a rules stickler from both sides of the screen, as a player and as a DM. I would say that I'm more of a rules paralegal than a rules lawyer. It's like, at the end of the day, it's the DM's call. They do whatever they want. If I'm the DM, that means I get to make the call, whatever I want. But the idea is that I play pretty close to the rules, not always as written, but as I feel they are probably intended, or what I think is the intention for the game to be the best that it can be for the group and the campaign that I'm running. So I tend to stick pretty closely to the rules, generally. Generally, if it's stuff I add, it's because I'm adding new stuff, like the Lingering Injuries, or the secret death saves or stuff like that. I'm adding stuff into the game. I'm usually not pulling things out of the game or being like, I don't want to use this mechanic or whatever. I'm generally adding mechanics into the game which is complicating the game, rather than stripping things out. It depends. I go both ways. But I think as far as ubiquitous homebrew house rules for everybody, everywhere, all the time, Rule of Cool is very similar to the advice of yes-anding and always doing yes-anding. Like, both of these things, the Rule of Cool and yes-and advice, are good ideas. I think they're really bad dogma, though. I think there's this kernel of advice that's like, yeah, the Rule of Cool is like, everybody likes it. It's the how you want to do this kind of thing, where you're like, okay, we're out of combat, you've killed the thing, but you get to determine, you tell me how you take this thing out so you can have your cool moment and describe that, and I'll help describe it with you. And things like that. And I think everybody's on the same page. Everybody kind of likes that. I don't think there's a lot of people that are like, well, that's not how it really happened. I think most people are like, yeah, that's cool. I want it to be cool. I want my character to do cool stuff. I think that's very, very common as a player character. As a player for your character, I should say. At the same time, it's very much like the yes and advice, and be like, if you're always reflavoring everything, if you're always using the Rule of Cool rather than actually using, especially when there are rules for the thing that you're trying to do in the game, I think that's where you usually get into trouble. Now, like I said, I kind of fall on both sides, because I'm often like, I think that the rules for jumping in D&D are kind of stupid. Where it's just like, hey, you just either jump them because of your strength score, you either jump high enough or you jump long enough, or you don't, and you always know how far and how high you can jump. And I'm just like, that's not... It's not even that it's not realistic, which it's not. It's not that everybody you can know for sure, I can always jump 12 feet. I can always jump 12 feet. But also, the idea is like, the reason that we make checks is because there is this risk reward. There is a potential consequence for the action. So if that's the case, then when you make a jump, then I want you to make a roll, because the consequence is that you're probably gonna fall in the hole that you're trying to jump over. Now, if it's a high jump and you're just trying to scramble up a wall or something like that, now assuming that it's not like you're trying to scale a 50-foot sheer cliff with a single jump, like Superman style, or jump over a building or something like that, where you're just like, nope, that doesn't happen. We're not going to rule cool that. It doesn't matter if you get a natural 20 or not. You can't leap 50 feet into the air. We're not doing that without the jump spell. There is a mechanic for that. It is the jump spell. If you want to take the jump spell, then I'll let you jump on top of buildings, because it triples basically your jump. So it is this, just like the yes and advice, it's like, there are good ideas here, but when it's like, no, it's always the right thing to do. That's always definitely how to do it. Forget about anything else that's going on. I think, like I said, bad dogma. It's not a great way to do it. Personally, I feel pretty comfortable dipping into the rule of cool as a dungeon master, because I am confident in my understanding not only of the game rules and the mathematics and design behind D&D 5e24 design, just because that's the type of person I am, and I've been playing D&D for a while, and I'm like, why does the math do that? I'm one of those people that's like, how does this work, and why does it work this way? But I know that a lot of people aren't. So I feel really, really comfortable dipping into the rule of cool, because I know enough about the disparate mechanics of D&D that I'm like, I feel like I can basically drop it within the ballpark. I know in the ballpark what's gonna probably feel right. I'm comfortable about the numbers. I know enough about how different aspects of D&D work, and different items and spells and mechanics of the different classes and monsters, that I always feel pretty comfortable about doing that. But if you're not a dungeon master who is mechanically sound, I guess would be the way to describe that in the game. If you're like, why, you might be looking at it and being like, I don't understand why passive perception starts with a 10 plus your modifier and skill bonus and proficiency bonus, but the DC for my spell starts at 8 plus my modifier plus my proficiency bonus. If you don't understand the difference, why one starts at 10, one starts at 8, then when you're coming up with DCs, it can be difficult. You're not always sure what's the right kind of DC to set. And so that's the sort of thing you start investigating. Like, when I first got into 2014, I'm like, actually, why does it start at 8? And so I started looking at it and be like, well, these things start at lower numbers, but these things don't start at lower numbers. What's the difference that's going on here? Why is it like this? But that's just me and how my brain works. So again, because I know that sort of stuff, I feel very comfortable about being like, oh, I can rule of cool this, or I know there's not already a mechanic for this that I want to use, or it's like the jump mechanics, and I'm being like, hey, yeah, I mean, technically you can just jump across it, but the idea is that because there is an aspect of failure, that's why you need to make the athletics check. There's a consequence for that failure, which is that you fall in the pit and you're going to take some damage, and that's why you have to make the jump, because it's sometimes with this example about like when you roll the dice and when you don't roll the dice, the one that I like to use is and this will, I guess, show my age at this point, because basically nobody does this anymore, but taking keys to unlock the door of your car. I guess it could be your house too. Though anymore. Now with digital locks, that's even a thing. But the idea that finding the key on your keychain and sticking it in the lock and turning it does not require a roll. right? That's a simple action. Everybody's competent at doing that. There's no pressure. There's no consequence for failure or anything like that. But if I throw you into a slasher horror movie where, Jason's walking along behind you or zombies or whatever, now suddenly there is a consequence for failure. So now even though this is an incredibly simple thing, there's this pressure on you. And now you have to roll for your ability to find the key and get it in the lock and open it up, because we watch horror movies and what happens? They fumble the keys and they drop the keys, and then the zombies or the slasher guy gets closer and closer and closer. It's like, are they going to be able to get in the car? Are they going to be able to get through in time? Are they going to get caught? Are they going to have to abandon it? Is this how we ensure in the movie that they can't use the car to escape? Because then maybe the bad guy catches up to them and they run off, and the bad guy kicks the keys off into the undergrowth somewhere, and it's like, oh, well, now I can't use the car because I can't get into the car. That kind of stuff. So it is very much, we use the checks because the checks need to have some sort of benefit or consequence that's important to what's going on. If we don't have those things, then we don't need to roll. And that's why I think the jumping rules are kind of weird. I don't necessarily need to know how far a character can jump statistically to be like, can I jump a 20-foot chasm? Probably not. Not without some help. Now, if you guys figure out how to, they're like, well, can I use this grapple, and is there something on the ceiling I can throw my grappling hook across, and I can, do a classic swing on the rope across the pit? That's where you roll cool and be like, I didn't think of anything being on the ceiling, but yeah, there's absolutely something that you can do it in. And because this is a thing in which will basically allow you to bypass this check, like, now there's going to be a roll that's associated. And you go, okay, well, what's the consequence? Why can't I just throw the grapple again? You're right, I need to come up with some consequence for that. Like, oh, there's some sort of cleft in there. But if you, and I could do this in a number of different ways. It's like, if you throw the cleft in there, maybe you throw it in there, and depending on what you get, if you roll really low, it's like, oh yeah, you hit it, you get it in there. You're not sure if it's going to hold your weight, though, if you try to swing. And you won't know that until you try to swing across. And now it's just a random chance thing. Like, do you trust in this? Do you need to find some other way around it? Do you need to find some other way to go with this? Do you trust it? You're going to roll the dice on that? Literally roll the dice on that and take your chance? Another thing would be like, oh, well, you throw it and you missed it. Okay, because you missed it, you will be able to do this. This is one of the things where you kind of do a fail forward aspect. You go, okay, we're going to fail forward. You're definitely going to be able to get the grappling hook in there and do it. The thing is that it's going to take you some time. And because it's going to take you some time, I'm going to roll for a random encounter to see if any monsters show up while you guys are taking the, minutes that it takes you to throw this grappling hook again, until you finally get it in that cleft and find purchase. Now I would do one of those two. Like, I wouldn't put both of those together, because then you make this encounter, this environmental exploration encounter, too difficult. Now you're like, okay, you got it, and orcs show up, and that's really intense, but if the first person swings across and then immediately falls in the pit because the thing breaks because you did the random chance thing and they didn't roll well, you're like, okay, now the situation is way, way worse, because now you have somebody who's fallen down in the pit, who may or may not be okay. Depending on how deep the pit is, you might not even know where they are. You might not be able to see them. And now your party's down a person, and as these orcs break into this cave or wherever or dungeon chamber, etc. And now you're a man down in this fight. And you don't have the grappling hook to get across the chasm where you can all just kind of like swing your way across really fast trying to run away. Which would probably be the way that I'd want to run that encounter, is be like, oh, there's one person who's like holding them back at the door while everybody else is running across, and then has to run and swing across themselves, and then maybe they have to figure out how to dislodge the grapple as the orcs are maybe shooting arrows at them or whatever. It could be a fun encounter, right? We just kind of made a fun encounter off of what I was just trying to do as a rules explanation for the rule of cool. Another big issue with yes and rule of cool, just in general, especially that advice, is this friction it creates across games. across game tables. And that's between, if you're familiar with legal systems, which, yeah, we're pulling in stuff that's way outside of D&D for a second. If you're familiar with legal systems, you're familiar with the idea of code law and case law. Code law is raw. That's the rules as written. These are the laws. This is how things are supposed to go. Case law is basically rules as intended. But it also functions, the way that case law functions is that it sets precedent for, hey, when situations like this come up and we look at this, we kind of decide as a group of people that we believe that this is what the law should be. This is the things that we decide whether somebody's innocent or guilty. Is this a crime? Is this not a crime? Etc. But those two things together can clash heads, and it creates disagreement and expectations of how the game functions, which is very much sort of how U.S. legal system works. We have the laws that are written, but we also have a lot of case law precedents where you're looking at previous decisions of very similar court cases and be like, oh, well, this sets a precedent. So and you have to come up with a pretty big reason to upset that precedent, to not follow that precedent that is also interpreting the same rules as written to be the rules as intended. That's just a weird legal thing. It's interesting. One of the things that often comes up, I feel like, in my life, and people, because I know a lot of random stuff about a lot of random stuff, people be like, why do you even know what that is? And the answer is usually D&D. It's like, usually I had to look something stupid up for D&D, because that's just how my brain works. That's the stuff that lights my neurons on fire. But also sometimes it's like, oh, here's a thing that's outside of D&D that, because I know because of other things, other training and experiences and proficiencies in my life, in my real life character sheet, my proficiencies over here, and pulling that in from, my real life character sheet background, and pulling that in and looking at it and being like, oh, this is something that I can use to help interpret D&D. And that understanding, I think, if you look at code law and case law and think about precedent and things like that, that is very fundamental to figuring out how to make the rules work at your table. It's super helpful, because we'll often find out one of the problems with this yes and or rule of cool is like, oh, I let you get away with this thing once, and because we set that precedent, now you're always going to think if it went really well or if it was really easy or whatever, your players will be like, well, we're going to do that thing again because it worked and it was very easy and it was super effective, so we're going to do that. Which gets into very video game design, where if you talk to video game designers especially, they'll talk about there's kind of this rule of thumb that's like, left up to their own devices, players will optimize the fun out of a game so that they can be as optimal and efficient at playing the game as possible. That's why so many games have build guides and things like that. And the idea is that there's often a lot of video game design that kind of pushes you away from whatever, there is an acronym for it that I can't think of off the top of my head because I can't remember that thing, and which is basically that you figure out your one optimal thing that you can do, and you keep doing that optimal thing, that optimal course of action as a player of a video game, until the game basically forces you to have to do something else. And that's what they talk about, is like, given to their own devices, like, players will bore themselves with their own gameplay just trying to be efficient. So sometimes you have to put in those skill checks or those skill breaks and be like, hey, now you guys have to do something that you're not good at. Or I'm going to throw you into a situation where the thing that you usually do just isn't going to work. You're going to have to figure out something else to do. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to be painful, and it's going to be growth, and it's going to be, all right, well, now we have to readjust how we play the game, and now we search for whatever our new first order operation is going to be for figuring out how to be the most efficient and optimal in the game. Because we're humans, and we don't like to work. And so we want to be the most efficient and optimal as we can be at work. Because we are lazy creatures. Like all creatures. We are not special in that regard. All creatures are lazy. We're all lazy. So rule of cool is it something I use in my game? Yeah. Do I use it all the time in my game? No. Usually I use the rules most of the time. Unless there are very specific reasons or very specific situations, which come up a lot, actually. Or you have to interpret the rules, or the rules are unclear as to how this interaction is supposed to happen. And in that case, you're like, well, I'm gonna err on the side of my players, in general. Because I want them, they're the people who I'm enjoying the game with. The game does not care about whether your player characters succeed or fail. I do as the dungeon master, and you do, my players in this context. So in general, I'm going to err on your side because I want you guys to have fun and keep coming back, and we keep playing the game. Now, if I don't want to keep playing the game anymore, I guess that's a different story. If I decide, you know what, I actually hate you guys. So now I'm going to invoke the rule of uncool. And we're going to use even worse raw and make everything's going to be, I'm going to make this a toxic, miserable experience of a game. And if that's the case, you should probably stop running the game. Or stop hanging out with these people. One of those things is probably the thing you should do. If that's the case. Alright, the next one is flat modifier flanking over advantage. I've played in systems that have both. Because before D&D 5e, though technically the advantage mechanic was introduced, it was introduced in 4e for one specific class, for the Invoker? Is that who it's for? I think it might be for the Invoker. It's been so long I'm trying to remember the names of the class. It's one of the divine classes. And they have it's a special class thing that only they do. It's like if they are alone with an enemy and they have no allies around them, they have the ability to roll twice and take the higher roll when they make attacks. And that's just the advantage mechanic. And it was really cool. And it was only this one class that got to do it. And when you got to do it, it made you feel super cool. And it was popular enough. It was such a neat mechanic that it kind of morphed and got changed into 5e as this advantage-disadvantage mechanic, which worked really well because it took a lot of the floating modifier stuff that was present in 4e, but most primarily present in 3rd edition 3.5 that translated over into Pathfinder, where you have a whole bunch of little floating modifiers. Well, I get a +1 for this and a +2 for this, but I have a -2 for this. And so every time that you're turn and you're trying to do stuff, you often have to add up 4 or 5 bonuses. That can actually be pretty common in the game. You have to do quite a bit of little mental math to get around and figure out it exactly. Whereas the 5e24 advantage-disadvantage mechanic, that's why it's been so potent, is that it's so simple, and simplicity is elegance. You're like, hey, if you have advantage, you get to roll twice and take the higher. If you have disadvantage, for whatever source, or multiple sources, you roll 2 dice and you take the lower. It's a simple thing, it's elegant, we know that it adds up to about a ±5. Which is pretty swingy for 5e24's really low math, where modifiers don't abound as they did in previous editions. So when I go back to, hey, do we want to add flat modifier flanking instead of advantage? And my answer to that from personal experience is no, I don't want to do that. In fact, you should take that idea and you should take it out back and you should put it out of its misery. That's an extremely bad idea, in my opinion. And of course, my opinion is objective fact. We all know that. It's certainly not subjective in any way or form. So yeah, I don't think, it's definitely not something I use in my games, but technically it is something I use in my games. We're gonna get there. It's not the game that I run, it's the game that I play in. I'll tell you about it. Let me get there. First, really sort of my object with it is the granularity of it. 5e24 5e 2024 is very much built around, the entire system is designed to get away from that previous edition floating modifier bloat, to make it simple and elegant. Like I said, that's the design. And that is one of the things that has made this editions, S in parentheses, successful with a much broader audience than previous D&D editions, is because it avoids those granular floating modifiers, those +1s, those +2s, etc., the stuff that makes the previous and older editions, especially 3rd and 4th, more crunchy, more complex to play. And hey, if you love that stuff, that's great, man. I get it. I like that stuff too. And the best part for it is, hey, if you're really interested in that granularity, if you really want to do that number crunching, that munchkining, that power gaming optimizing, baby, you love that, I have some, boy howdy, I got some great news for you. There's this game that's called Pathfinder, and you're gonna love it. You should really go give it a check out if you haven't done it yet. You're really gonna like it. Probably way more than the current edition of D&D. Go check it out, find it, play it. You'll find other people who are also going to enjoy that style of game. You guys can all hang out together, and it will be a lot of fun. And you won't have to deal with the theater kids who want to play the 5e 2024 with the rest of us, who want to do the collaborative storytelling, and I want to talk about my feelings and not about my, oh, I get a +2 in this very specific situation, so everything I do is try to leads up to creating this specific situation to do that. Again, not that there's wrong for it. Played a lot of Pathfinder. Played a lot of 4th edition. I like both of them. I don't enjoy that as much. And I think now as much as I certainly used to. All those floating modifiers and stuff. I have exited my arc as a power gamer. That is not the thing that entices me that much about playing anymore. You could call that character, or in this case, player growth. I don't know if I'd say growth. I'd just say it's just a change in what I want out of the game. What I'm looking for out of the game and what I want to do with the game. My reasons for playing have shifted, and my primary enjoyment out of the game has shifted. It's just different. It's not better or worse, it's just different. So, now let's talk about, I said I don't want this, I don't think it's a good idea. Let me talk about why I think it's a bad idea. And I think the primary reason that it's bad, and well, the first one is the granularity, because most people don't want to deal with that. First of all, that's the reason why 5e24 has been so successful with a broader audience. Much easier to get people into it, because they're like, hey, if you have some sort of advantage, you get the thing that's called advantage, and you roll 2 dice and you take the higher number. No math involved. No more math than what you were already doing. Calculate. And hey, if you're in a disadvantageous position, you just roll 2 dice and take the lower one. No additional math required. So it's very, like I said, it's simple. Simpleness is elegance in this situation. That's why it's such a fantastic game mechanic. But the primary reason that flanking modifiers, static modifiers, are a bad idea is because of how that advantage disadvantage works. Is that advantage disadvantage, like we said, if you have advantage from one source, multiple sources, doesn't matter. You always get the advantage. If you have disadvantage from one source, multiple sources, doesn't matter. You just get the one thing. If you have 3 advantages and 1 disadvantage, they cancel out. Doesn't matter how many there are on each side. There's no stacking up. It's just like, if there's something on this side and there is 1 or more things on this side, there's just nothing. It's the elegance of the system. They always cancel out. Doesn't matter, because there's no floating modifiers. Now, that's how the floating modifier works, is because you might get a -1 from this thing, but you might get a +3 from this thing. So you have to be like, okay, so in general, it's +2 plus my normal attack bonus plus whatever I roll. But because they are granular like that, you always have to do that stack math when you're doing things. Which is not the intent of 5e in 2024, is they were trying to get away from that. So that means that with a flat modifier for flanking abilities, part of that works. It means that if you have, and a lot of abilities do this in 5e 2024, where you need advantage on this roll, or you have to have advantage for this thing, or you can't have disadvantage to do this thing. Meaning that if you have a flat modifier for flanking, anything that requires advantage for you to do won't work. Anything that requires you, or that you can't do with disadvantage, you can do. So it changes the mechanics of the game in an unintended way, often. But more importantly, and this is the thing that I got to, like I said, it's in one of the campaigns I'm running right now. We're using the revised martial equipment, third-party stuff that really, if you've played with the 2024 weapon masteries, it's like the weapon masteries escalated, ascendant almost. Like there's lots of stuff going on, including floating modifiers in it sometimes. And one of the things that would come up very, very often is because it does use flat modifiers for flanking. And so if you flank with one creature, you get a +2. If you flank with 2 or more creatures, you get a +5. Now, in addition to that bonus flanking, you can also get advantage and disadvantage from other sources in the game, because there's lots of other sources that give advantage and disadvantage. And because you don't have the advantage-disadvantage situation from flanking, it means that there are situations where you can get really, really high rolls very easily and still be able to hit pretty regularly even if you have disadvantage. So, like I said, I'm currently playing a campaign, so let me give you an idea. So, between proning and spell effects and conditions like blinded or stunned, the PCs can often end up, and flanking. It's very easy for the PCs, and this happens in the game that I play in, that are up front, smack them with the stick fighters kind of people, are not even martial characters, because one of them is very much a spellcaster, but it is a hexblade, are people who are up front hitting things with weapons, have a +5 to the roll from their flanking, because they're flanking with 2 other creatures, because they're swarmed over one of the monsters, and they'll have advantage to that roll. So they're effectively, we said, advantage effectively kind of mechanically gives us about another +5. That means that's +5 here, +5 there, a +10 to a roll. If you get a +10 to your roll, you hit a lot, and you hit high. You're going to roll high numbers. We roll, it's very often, we're rolling very, very consistently in the mid to upper 20s at the level that we're at, which is 8. So pretty consistently, we're rolling in the mid to upper 20s for attack rolls. That situation. Now, this system also has a crit style extra damage. So if you get +5 or +10 to the creature's AC, there's a chance that you will do additional damage based off of your weapon type. Some weapons have it for, it's called mighty or powerful blows. Some of them give you extra damage or extra effect if you get +5. Like one of our characters does wounds on a +5, which means that then they start taking damage at the start of their turn as a bleed effect. Again, like I said, it adds a lot more complexity into the martial stuff. Or you get an extra die of damage if you do a +10 to it. So when you get the opportunity to have consistently a +5, +7, +10 on top of your already normal 2-hit bonus, and in addition there's a weapon property in revised martial equipment called Keen, which is if the AC of the creature is 14 or lower, you get a +1, or if it's 15 or higher, you either get a +1 or +2 to your attack roll as well. So in my case, there are a lot of situations where you could get effectively a +12 on top of whatever your bonus to attack with, which like in that very specific arrangement for my ranger would be a +23 to hit. So almost guaranteed, even before I roll, that I'm gonna get that extra crit style damage. So I'm heaping on all that extra martial damage, and our DM has found it really difficult because our characters can just pile on damage very, very quickly. We don't miss very often either, as long as they get up close and they have flanking, and we find some other way to get advantage, which is extremely common. There's a lot of easy ways to get advantage in 5e 2024. The fact that to the point where you don't need flanking. Flanking is technically an optional rule, and that's why the rogue functions how they do with their backstab, where they just need to have one character close to it, which previously, if flanking was in it, they would probably have just said you need to have flanking with it, or some other kind of combat advantage over them, such as hiding. But meaning that it was always really easy to hit and be able to deal your sneak attack damage. So yeah, definitely against flat modifier flanking, if that wasn't clear. It's not great because it also doesn't overcome things in which you would also get advantage, so you do double dip often. And even in situations where you have disadvantage, like the things I was talking about with the surprise martial equipment, if you already have a +2 or +5 to your attack and you have disadvantage, having the static modifier is actually often better than the advantage mechanic, because you will always get the +5, whereas an advantage mechanic is kind of an average of what you will roll. So sometimes you're going to roll lower, sometimes you're going to roll higher. So having a +5 means you will always get the +5, which means you'll always pretty much be better than 50% of what you're going to roll on advantage anyways. So it's nicer to have the static modifiers. So if you have the static modifiers and advantage, because again, those things don't cancel each other out, those two things don't interact with each other, is that even if you have disadvantage but you have a +5 to hit, there's still a good chance that you're going to hit anyways, if you're playing with that, if that's the numbers you're using. Now the numbers are different depending on what kind of system you use, but generally I'm away. Again, it slows down the math when you're doing things, which is already makes the combats take longer, and combats already take a little bit too long in contemporary D&D as it is. So I'm trying to reduce math, not add a lot of math into my system. I want to make things easier. I don't want to make things more difficult. That's the same reason why I use like the resource die mechanic. It's because it's easy. There's no math in it. There's not a lot of bookkeeping. You roll the die. If you roll the 1, if you don't roll the 1, then nothing happens. If you roll the 1, you just reduce the die size. It's super easy. Takes that long. Let's move on to the next thing. So our next one here are, this is where I'm starting to like put some things together, because there were enough things that were like, they're really similar, so I'm going to start to fold them together a little bit. Hero points or action dice or any sort of systems that give you extra action economy, essentially, to give players extra resources or points to do that. So the thing is that the game comes out of the box with inspiration. Now, if you're like myself, you basically never use inspiration, which I feel like is most tables. It's definitely been my experience that most tables, especially most dungeon masters, forget about inspiration. Now, 2024 rules, and like I said, I was talking earlier about Oriel and his party where he's got 2 humans in it, and he has his own power. And it's a smart switch in 2024 that they did, is they put a lot more onus on tracking inspiration on the player characters and give them ways to get it. So it's now on the players to remember, oh, I can generate this stuff. And it doesn't always have to be the dungeon master who's like, oh, right, you did a cool thing, and so the reward for doing the cool thing is not just doing the cool thing, but it's now I give you this vague thing that you can cash in for advantage or to take away disadvantage on a roll. Inspiration's a really cool idea. I like inspiration. The thing is that because there's not, especially in the 2014 rules, since there's not a lot of mechanics that are tied explicitly to it, it didn't get used very often. That has been my experience, and I think it's been the experience for a lot of people who plays 5e, is that it just ends up not getting used very often, unfortunately. And so the hero points or the action dice, I like them, and here's the reason why I like them. Because I'm a big fan of Savage Worlds. In Savage Worlds, you get bennies, which are basically hero points. And the way that it does it is it says, hey, at the start of every session, you take physical tokens. It tells you to get physical tokens and give out 3 to each, usually 3, to each player at the table. And it has explicit mechanics about what you can use those things for. They're very mechanical. They're very situational. You're like, hey, I want to soak damage. I'm going to spend a penny to do that. And you give it to the game master, which means now I have a penny that I can use. And so it becomes this traded currency back and forth. But the idea is that it always resets every session. And so there are systems that do it, but they are hardwired. They are baked into the system. And you see that in the transition of 2024 with how we do heroic inspiration now, where they did see that they saw that they liked that there were people who liked 5e inspiration, but were like, it's hard to remember to use because it's not really in the system. It's like this thing that kind of hangs off over here, way far over by itself. And so we fold that in, and now suddenly people will use it more. But I do like the Savage Worlds more thing where it's like, hey, you have to give it to them. You give it to them at the start of every session. You take it back from them at the end of the session. If you don't lose the stuff if you don't use your bennies by the end of the session, they go away. You lose them. But next session you're going to start with 3 more. So there's no carryover in between them like inspiration does. And it's just a better system for tracking things like that. And I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with D&D in general. Because when I think about like spell slots and things like that and hit dice and be like, you have to carry your levels of resources between sessions often. Or else you're ending every session with a long rest, which you shouldn't do, I don't think. I don't think that's a good idea. I think that if you try that, you will understand why. And it's too much resting, and that means the combats you have to make really, really big combats all the time, which take a bunch of time at the table, which then makes it feel like you're always doing combat. Or otherwise that they're not spending resources on stuff. So you do need to carry them over between sessions. But that does also mean that, stuff happens. You forget to mark it down. You're like, I can't remember how many spell slots I spent last time or whatever. Or the app has an update and restarts, and it unfortunately clears all your character sheet information as far as tracking stuff. Those kind of things happen. And so having something like the hero action points, which I like the idea of, but for me, it's very much like I often want those things contained in the individual session. I wish there was a better way to do that, especially with D&D. And now you see that in old school, like West Marches style games or old D&D in general, where you're like, oh, you need to get back to town by the end of the session. But that's because resting works different. The resources that are available to play your characters are a lot more limited in the older editions. So there's not a lot of like, you go out adventuring for weeks at a time. That's a lot more difficult to do in those editions. Hey, Cyber, how are you doing? What edition do I run? I've run a lot of different games. Right now I'm running D&D 2024 for the most part, with some stuff that I've stolen back from 5e and some homebrew systems that I've layered on top of it. But let's see, recently we've run what? Index Card RPG, Savage Worlds. I played in some OSE. I didn't run it, as well as Dungeon World. I don't think of what else we played recently. Some World of Darkness stuff. All that stuff's pretty common for me. Mazes. Iron Sworn. Stuff like that. Yeah, side-based initiative is a good one. Yeah, very old school style, doing the side-based initiative. I actually use a slightly different initiative. Before I get ahead of myself, is initiative actually on this list? I think it is somewhere. Combos, alternatives, adjusting customer last feature. Oh, I guess it's not on here. That's very weird that that's not on here. I guess because it's not... Right, these are the most popular changes. I guess that's not a popular enough change. Yeah, I actually don't tend to use standard initiative in general anymore. I don't use... I do it slightly different, so it's not side-based initiative. I use fast and slow rounds. So to do initiative, my initiative's homebrew initiative systems... Homebrew initiative system is slightly different, where the monsters always take 10 on initiative. And they're in their grouping. And then if you roll better than whoever the lead monster is in the combat, if you hit whatever their initiative is or higher, you go in the fast round. I don't care who goes when. You guys can make combo attacks and all that stuff. And if you roll below them, you're in the slow round. You go after them. Just to make things faster instead of trying to track everybody's individual initiatives. And then for me, what I like about it is that it gives players the opportunity to be like, do a little bit of strategy and be like, okay, I think I want to do this. I want to set you up to do this thing. It gives them a little bit more teamwork aspect, which I really like, and a little bit more talking about and contemplating what we're going to do as a team during combat, as opposed to what am I going to do on my turn. So yeah, slightly different. So it's not quite side-based initiative, but it's close. Implementation of it like the Savage Worlds Bennies, where it's like per session or something like that. And I do think it will extremely help to remember to do stuff like that if you have physical tokens, which I meant to take to my game yesterday to deal with my new character that's got the heroic inspiration they can hand out during rest, and I forgot to do it. I have some what do I want to use the counters? I have some potion counters. I might use those just because they're nice little tactile kind of things. I might use those. Oh, the next one was initiative. I skipped over the next one when I was looking through it. Flexible or dynamic initiative or delayed or ready mechanics. Allowing players to shift initiative order, delay turns, or reroll initiative for more dynamic combat. Yeah, I already talked about doing fast and slow round. I already do slightly different initiative anyways. It's faster. I actually don't have to write anything down other than like monsters are here. These two player characters go before the monsters. These two player characters go after the monsters. Done. I don't need to know everybody's individual initiatives or anything like that. You two guys are going. You guys coordinate. We're using it actually in the other campaign that I'm playing in, and we all like it. We all think it's really great. It makes it rolling for initiative like that, rather than this weird 3-minute mini game that we do before we start combat, where we roll things and wait to tell the DM when we're gonna get. So they can like put everybody in the correct list order. It works a lot better. I've also used I played with Popcorn Initiative before. I don't really love Popcorn Initiative. I've also played with just Round the Horn Initiative, which I like it as well. Where it's basically everybody rolls off, and then whoever rolls the highest, we start with that player and just go clockwise around the table like you will with a standard board or card game. Like whoever rolls the highest, which is generally going to be the rogue, or some other dex-based class like a monk or something like that, will often end up going first, and then we just go clockwise around. This is very similar to how Index Card RPG does it, and they were like, so Index Card RPG actually has a graphic in it that tells you what is generally the optimal setting of players around the table. So the person who will roll the highest will be just left of the DM, so that way when they go, all the players will generally get to go before the monsters go, which is very funny. Which is fun, and like if you want to do that setup that way, but you might want to set what is somebody you enjoy sitting next to more, or a different character, and swapping up the things. It's like if you wanted to play most optimally, that would generally be how you sit around the table, if you care about that. Otherwise, delayed or ready mechanics, yeah, because you can ready actions in 5e24 just right off the bat. Very easy. Delay is not really a thing that translated over into 5e. There's not really a delay action. I'm fine with delaying. I don't care. Like I said, I love Savage Worlds. One of my favorite systems. I do like in Savage Worlds Initiative, you use a deck of cards, if you didn't know that. And so if you get the Joker, if you pull the Joker out of the deck of cards, the Joker is a very special thing. It doesn't mean you go first. Aces go first. What it means is that when you get the Joker initiative card, you get to go whenever. You basically start off combat with a readied action, and that readied action is take your turn. So you can jump in the middle of a bad guy's turn and be like, and you see the bad guy, he pulls out his Winchester repeating rifle and points it at Haas, and you slap down your Joker and like, I'm going right now, actually. Okay, it's your turn. You see this guy turning, and he's about to shoot Haas. What are you gonna do? So it's a really cool thing. I like that. So I like that delay aspect. It does make the initiative a little bit more wonky to keep track of. But also, there are plenty of games, and this is something I used to do a lot more. I don't do it as much anymore because I changed how I do initiative. But for standard initiative, I would just have one of the players keep it. I'd be like, I've got enough to do. This is Dungeon Master or Game Master. I've got enough plates that I have to keep spinning. You, over there, who's sitting there picking their nose, not doing anything, while I'm doing all the setup for this combat, you deal with initiative. You figure out everybody's initiative and write it down and put it in order, and you are the initiative keeper, and so it's up to you to pay attention to ensure when people go. You tell them who's going and tell them who's on deck after them, so they know who's coming up, who needs to start preparing their turn. So yeah, I mean, that's how I do it, or at least how I used to do it before I switched to the way I do it now. And I mean, you could delay to the slow round, but there's usually, that happens. Honestly, that doesn't happen very often. I feel like there's just not really a lot of good reasons in that new initiative system, because you can always coordinate with the person who's in the same block of initiatives in the same fast or slow rounds with you. So there's often not a reason to delay or hold an action. You're just like, oh, I just let the person do their thing, and then I do my thing, even though I technically have a higher initiative. Whatever. Do I add any additional ability scores? Oh, you have mana, perception, luck, and sanity. No, not explicitly. I do some, like, fame or renown tracking and kind of a karma system, but not as a straight-up stat. And as for sanity, yeah, I just don't think, that's, for D&D, D&D's just not, it's been my experience, it's just not a super great system for running horror as far as doing something like a sanity, as opposed to something like, you know, a Call of Cthulhu or something like that, where sanity is a much more important aspect to that game. Is that D&D, because of its sort of superhero, especially contemporary D&D, is its sort of superhero nature is kind of out of the box kind of play. Sanity doesn't necessarily work super well. But no, I don't have a straight up mana system or perception, or like all those things are kind of handled by other things in the game. I don't necessarily have additional ability scores for it. The only thing that I said is, like, I take a renown or karma, but that's just something that, like, I track behind the screen. That's not something that I do with the players. I basically take notes as to what the player characters have done during the campaign, and people's reactions to what they've done. So, like, did they do good stuff? Then, regardless, they're going to gain some amount of notoriety if people know the things they did. Now, whether that makes them famous or infamous will be up to them and how people start to treat them in the future, because they might go into a town in 10 sessions and be like, as soon as people see who you are and you've gained some notoriety so they know who you are, and somebody sees you coming, they shutter up. They shutter all the windows and lock all their doors, and nobody comes out, and basically nobody's out on the street when you roll into town, because you're known as bad dudes and people don't want to be around you. You end up being the bad guy sometimes. Critical skill check results. Yeah, this was actually an interesting one. I was just listening to the most recent Dungeon Court episode of NADPod, that's not another D&D podcast, where they were talking about a situation in which a character rolled a natural 20 on their saving throw, but still failed the skill check, or failed the save. The save was against Tiamat, so it makes sense. And then ended up getting knocked out. They took too much damage, they got knocked out. And they're like, it feels bad to roll a natural 20 and still fail the check. And I'm like, yeah, that does make sense. And that's sort of how I feel about critical skill checks. It's like, in general, you know, if you have a -2 to your charisma and you roll, and then, you know, you're the barbarian with the -2 to your charisma, and you're, you know, unga bunga mode most of the time, and you walk up and you roll a natural 20 because I have asked you to make some sort of like persuasion check, or maybe you're bartering for supplies, or who knows what it is, and you roll a natural 20, I'm probably just going to give it to you. Honestly, because I'm not going to, generally most DCs, on rare occasions, will dip up into the 20s, but in general, you know, they stay in the teens for the most part. That's kind of where 5e's 2024's bread and butter is for DCs, between 13 and 17 most of the time. So if you stick within that range, things feel pretty good. Now, obviously, there are characters who are going to be really good at stuff, like bards or rogues, who are naturally very gifted at the things they're supposed to be good at, so they roll really high already. So, do I do crit success or crit fails? Kind of, but they're all very narrative. Like, if you... Sometimes it'll be like, well, if you crit success, like in this barbarian example, they're trying to haggle for potions, and they roll a natural 20. And I go, great, you get a deal on the potions. I might even give you a better deal on the potions. But more likely, what I will do is I will be like, I'm going to add a little something something. I'm going to zhuzh it up. I'm going to give you a little extra. And that extra thing isn't always just a benefit. Sometimes it's something that's going to lead to a benefit. Basically, instead of giving you a reward for rolling your natural 20, what I'm doing is I'm going to give you a new opportunity. This came up in, I believe, in the fairgrounds, in the fair, one of the fair sessions I was running. Big, like, county fair kind of vibe. Big religious holiday. People are there. And a player character wants to get a deal on some armor. Be like, oh, you don't have enough money for the armor. Alright, can I haggle with them? You make some haggling checks, roll natural 20, be like, okay, here's what's going to happen. They're like, look, you're competing, you've got some notoriety, you're competing in the games, people are keeping eyes on you at this festival, you're a person to watch out for, you're not quite a VIP, but you're like a person that people are like watching for. You're kind of almost like a sports athlete. Like, people know who you are and they're keeping an eye on you and they want to see you compete in these games. So all you've got to do, and I'm going to let you have this thing, all you have to do is essentially gets a brand deal out of it. What you have to do is you have to promote my shop or stall during the thing. It's like, and you tell people, hey, this is where I got my gear from, this is what I'm doing, you know, you do a brand deal essentially. And then you get to things like, that's your natural 20. It gives you an opportunity. Now, if you, and this is what happened with this character in the very beginning, is they got their brand deal and they started working on it and go out there and they start doing that stuff. And then they're like, cool, got my thing. Mine goes smooth, thing goes whoosh. I think about other things that are going on in the game and go back to talk to that person like halfway now that the festival's over, and go back to them. And this person's kind of upset with you. They're like, hey, nobody's come here telling me that you promoted my shop. I'm not seeing any increased traffic or anything. And so you're going to give me that thing back, and if you want it back, you're going to have to promote it for the rest of the festival. And so there's this push-pull, it becomes this RP thing. There was an opportunity, they screwed up the opportunity in the beginning, but then came back around on it and made sure to promote the things that the things did, and then they came back and they were able to recover the item, but they weren't able to use that item during the festival, which is very important. So yeah, so oftentimes, like, that's what I'll do with a critical success. It'll be like, okay, I'm not just going to give you something great. It's oftentimes, now I'm going to give you some sort of new opportunity, or maybe I'll shift how this person views you, or maybe you've made kind of a friend here, or maybe you've rolled a natural 1 and you've like offended somebody, or you spoke out of turn or said something, you know, you triggered them in some way that you didn't know about, and now this person's like shuts you down completely. And so now, not only on this barter check are you not getting your thing, you're not only not paying full price, they're like, actually, I'm not selling you anything, get out of here. you need to get the hell out of my shop. And you'd be like, and now if you ever show up in the shop, and like they're gonna remember you for a while. Now eventually you might do some good deeds, you might get back into good graces, you might need to come back and eat some crow and say some sorries. And then you can repair that relationship if it's important to you. For a lot of player characters, that won't be important. You'll be like, it's a shopkeep, I don't care. I'll find another shopkeep somewhere. It's not that big of a deal. But then that's one of the things we talked about where it's like, I have a little bit of a notoriety and a karma system that I'm kind of using behind the scenes to be like, okay, karma kind of goes down, notoriety kind of goes up because this person's going to tell them about this crappy interaction they had with this adventurer who's around town. Do stuff like that. See, next little piece of homebrew is max on crits, like crunchy crits, when you deal maximum possible damage. I actually like this rule. I use it sometimes. It's very much the 4th edition D&D style of crits, where it was just like you deal max damage and then you roll another weapon die on top of that. I like it because one of the things that does suck, and if you play with the rules as written, kind of critical things where you roll 2 dice and add your modifier to them, there are a lot of occasions, like not the majority, but not a super low amount of times, where you will roll both those dice and end up with a lower total than the max of the one of those die. So, for example, it's like, oh, I rolled a natural 20 with my longsword attack, and now I do 1d8 plus 5 damage. Or instead of the 1d8 plus 5 damage, I'm going to roll 2d8 plus 5 damage. Cool, I rolled a 2 and a 3. So I do 10 points of damage, which is pretty standard damage for me anyways. So I feel like I didn't get anything out of that critical hit. It didn't feel, right, where we talked about was like, what is the effect we want to have on the game? It doesn't feel like I made a critical hit. And that sucks. Like, it didn't feel like I really just did average damage, even though I crit. And that is not a ton of fun. So I've done it both ways. I think in general, I just kind of use the standard because honestly, people forget about it, myself included sometimes, is if we implement that, is especially for someone like me who plays and runs more than one game pretty regularly, where I'm like, I can't remember. It's difficult for me sometimes to remember which one is using which. Like even the other campaign that I'm playing in right now, where our DM often forgets, is like, hey, how does the max damage work again? It's like, oh, well, in this system we do max damage plus the die roll. And that's an RME thing. That's revised martial equipment. That's how that works out of the box. It tells you explicitly that's how it works. So it's a house rule, but it's a house rule in the homebrew we're using. So it's not an additional thing. It's baked in, is what I'm saying. Because there are other things that allow you to manipulate that based off of your equipment and your training of that equipment, your experience with that equipment. So do I like it? Yeah, I always really enjoyed that in 4th edition. That is probably one of the things that was the biggest shock to me in 5th edition. Is like, oh, if it immediately felt really bad playing 5th edition, being like, oh, when I make a crit, there's actually a pretty decent chance that I'll actually do less damage than I would do on a normal hit. And that does suck. I don't like that. It's not fun. But I understand once you get into higher levels and with things like smites and stuff like that, where you rolling a bunch of dice to be like, if you maxed half of those dice, that's a lot of damage right out the box. So I understand like that is probably why it's not designed that way. Why it's always designed to basically roll double, but on average that means that you on average do only one more point of damage per die that you're rolling. Per set of dice that you're rolling. So like if you roll 2d8 instead of 1d8, the average of that has a pretty normal distribution, right? Most of the time on those 2 dice, the combined total is gonna be about 9. More often than not. So you're really, when you do crit damage, you're like, I do on average about 1 extra point of damage, which is also doesn't feel super great. So it's not a great solution in the game. but I understand why doing the max on crit damage would be a problem for very specific character builds. Like I'm trying to think if we did. Well, I'm trying to think if we do it in the one that I play in, where I play the ranger with the RME ranger, where he's rolling oftentimes 3 dice with damage. He's rolling his bow damage plus the lightning damage plus his like favorite foe damage. And so when you max all that plus his bonus, and he's usually using power attack, I mean, he already does a buttload of damage in general. Wasn't really super trying to do that with that character. It just lends itself very easily based off of I just kind of, you know, dumbed my way, idioted my way, Mr. Beaned my way into figuring that out. I definitely was not trying to build a monster combat machine. It just accidentally kind of happened. But it will do a lot of damage, and it is an issue for the dungeon master for like putting together fights sometimes. So, do I like max on crits? Yes. Do I use it all the time? No, I use it sometimes. That's pretty much how I can say that, is that I use it sometimes. But is often forgotten by myself and other players. Simplified or optional encumbrance or slider carrying rules. Yeah. So the style of game I run, I don't have to worry about this too much. I think I talked about this on some previous streams, is that the way that I track overland travel, or not overland travel, but exploration, like exploration times, is that rather than being like, oh, you can move so many hexes in a day, it's like, oh, once you move so many hexes, there is an effort mechanic, and as soon as you hit that threshold, you have to start making active constitution saving throws. If you fail the constitution saving throw, you start taking points of exhaustion, and I use the 2014 exhaustion rules instead of the 2024 ones. It's like you immediately start having disadvantage on ability checks, which is bad when you're exploring. So it does give this thing, it's like, once you get tired, you should probably stop for the day unless you're really close to getting where you need to go. And if that's the case, or you have the one wizard who has a dog constitution, so they're always the one who's behind, and you have to figure out some other way for them to do things. And that's why we have things like mounts and beasts of burdens and carts and wagons and boats and ships. The idea is, with that homebrew that I have in my game, is that I want them to use those things, or have porters or hirelings that carry stuff for you, because if you have ways to offload your gear, you get advantage on those constitution saving throws. Or in the case of like, if you have chartered a ship or something like that, and you're not even crewing the ship, then you don't have to make any checks at all. The crew does all the work, and there's enough of them that it spaces out enough that they can kind of sail the ship as much as they need to. Or you're kind of going the optimal amount in the day that you can at speed. So it's different. I track ammunition and stuff differently. Like I said, I use a resource die mechanic, so it's not as much. I do really like the Pathfinder, Starfinder, the new Pathfinder and Starfinder encumbrance system. It is still a bit wibbly wobbly and still requires you to kind of do a lot of bookkeeping, which is the thing that I'm usually trying to get away from. That's what things people generally don't want to do in D&D. And I'm just a curmudgeon of a DM, and I just don't give out that much treasure, so it's pretty unlikely that my character, and I don't give out a lot of treasure and coinage. It's very unlikely that my players are gonna be walking around with 1,000 gold in their pockets. It's just not something that ends up happening in my games. And most of the stuff that they find, or wealth that they find, is tied up into material objects. Sometimes it'll be like you might find a massive marble statue, and you're like, this is worth a lot of money. You've got to get it to somewhere where you can sell it, which is not carrying that, obviously, because it's huge and it's heavy and you can't carry it. So you've got to get it to someplace where it can be sold, and you have to find somebody who wants it and can afford to buy it, which means that you need to generally transport it to a large city, which you may or may not be close to. And then you have to get into the logistics aspects to be like, okay, so we have to get like a wagon to get it out of here and then get it to maybe a ship so we can transport it to the nearest big city where you can find like a rich noble or royal who's going to have enough coinage to actually pay us what we think this thing is worth, which is its own kind of like adventure. So now I have a lot of things where that becomes the choices in a lot of things of dungeons and other adventures. Be like, this thing is worth a ton of money. I don't know how to get the money out of this thing because I often don't give my characters things like the holding. I think that that's actually things that we should probably in general do less as dungeon masters. It'd be like, if you want encumbrance to matter, you have to stop giving the players ways to get around encumbrance. And also, most of it's just like, keep it reasonable. It's like, you guys can carry around, a 6-pack of potions, no problem. You guys have backpacks, you throw a lot of stuff in backpacks. So it's really about, what I try to do is focus more on the bulkiness of the items that they get, and how do they transfer that into coinage, rather than giving them direct coinage that they can carry around and spend, because D&D already has a pretty big money problem. For player characters, if you give out rewards, as it says to in the books, where they are just flush with cash all the time. And if they're flush with cash all the time, they can buy their way out of a lot of problems. That's why you see things like the Bastion rules and things like that, because it's the new Bastion rules, because it's a way to try to, in video game terms, get the money out of the economy. Which is how, when you look at things like MMOs and how they're made, and shops, and this idea is like, to avoid super inflation and things like auction houses and things like that, is you have to find ways to pull the money out of the player economy by doing things like shops and taxes or whatever. And so Bastion is one of those things, so you can sink your money into building a keep or a mage tower or whatever you're building, a druid's copse or grove or etc. So that's what way. So the short answer is no, I don't really use a simplified or optional encumbrance or things. I do some things slightly differently, like how I manage resources, and focus instead on bulkiness of things and not giving a bunch of coinage. Like in the campaign I'm playing in, we just found a inert adamantine golem, and my character's like, this thing's great. This thing's probably worth a buttload of money. Also, just the resource of having this much adamantine would be super useful to us as player characters. The problem is that it's in a pit. It's in the trench underwater, like in the dark part of the ocean. How do we get it out of here? That becomes the more issue. Is like, how do I get this from here to a place where I can convert it into something? And that's because obviously we can't carry that. Does our ship have a crane on it? Yeah. Will the crane reach down here? Probably not. Do we have access to a lot of aquatic races and species who are our allies? Yes. Can we tap them to bring this to us, or do this for our alliance or whatever, and split off some of the cash for them? Probably, but it's probably not going to be super high on their priority list. For obvious reasons. They have an entire war effort they're working on. And while it's useful for the war effort, it is taking pretty much human resources away from other aspects of the war to go on a treasure recovery mission. It's like, it's not that important to the war. It might be actually more important logistically to have them continue the war effort. So it's very low end. So anything, and that's more of my Dungeon Master style, I guess, is that one of the things that I'm always looking to do as a Dungeon Master is like, how can I put a meaningful choice that the players are going to have to think about? Like, here's this incredibly valuable item. We cannot carry it with us. Or even if it's something smaller, like one of the go-to examples I have is like an art triptych, but let's say like a bejeweled chest. Like, it's a chest that's full of gold, like there's gold pieces in it, but it's also a huge like coffer chest. You can carry it, but it requires 2 hands for whoever's carrying it, and they have to have a pretty good strength score to do it. Which means, do you want your fighter or barbarian to spend their time trudging through the dungeon carrying this heavy chest, which, if they don't already have disadvantage on stealth, is going to give them disadvantage on stealth because it's going to make, there's a bunch of gold pieces and it's shifting around, clink, 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 as they're walking around, bouncing up and down. Also, that means that they don't have their weapons out, they don't have their shields out, they're not ready for combat. That means they got to drop this thing to start combat. Depending on the monsters that I have, or if they're carrying it overland, if you have the classic highway banditry random encounter. Well, the bandits are there. Remember that their goal is not to kill the player characters. They don't care about the player characters. They're there to get their filthy lucre. It's your GP or your HP. Well, if you have one of your idiot players to be like, drops the coffer that's with this huge jangle of gold coins in it to pull out their weapons, every one of those bandits is going to try to avoid attacking them and trying to scoop up an armful of gold and run off into the woods or whatever. And be like, okay, so now your goal for your motivation in this fight is very different, where you're trying to protect this coffer of gold against these bandits because they're not interested in attacking you or killing you. They might be running up and like using the dodge action and then or pulling a sack out as an item, as an object interaction, trying to like scoop a bunch of gold into a sack and then just take the dodge action to avoid getting attacked. And then maybe they run off with it, and maybe they chase it, or maybe you beat them into... About to say something else. You... would not have been fun. Instead, you scare them off. They run away. You get them to run away. But those bandits know that you have that money. And you know they're going to follow you. They're going to harry you. And they're going to wait till you guys go to sleep. And this thing is, they're probably not going to be so great at hiding. They're highway bandits. But they're going to be far enough away that they're kind of consistently outside of combat range. And you just know that they're going to attack you when you guys go to sleep. And so now this becomes this new situation that you have to deal with. How do I deal with a functionally less powerful enemy group of enemies who don't want to fight me, but are going to wait till I am in a very vulnerable position, and then when it's their best opportunity, come in here and actually steal our resources and maybe kill them. They might try to overpower, if you have the one, maybe the wizard, probably like you have like the wizard in the party, whoever's probably not armed and armored, or they're waiting for the fighter to go to sleep because they have to take off all their armor to do that, and then the fighter's like, no, I guess I'll just stay up and I'll take the point of exhaustion because I can't sleep in my heavy armor. Now we've made a very interesting situation that the players have to deal with. And I've done this with, the CR 1/4 bandits, and this could be like a level 5 party. And it's like, you guys still have to deal with this. What are you going to do with this chest? Now, obviously they're going to have some spells at that point, potentially, where they could be like Liamon's tiny hut, and they're going to put stuff in there, and that'll be fine for them. But just knowing that these people are going to continue to harry you this entire time is, it's a fun encounter. It's a thing that doesn't come up, I think, standardly in D&D, or certainly not 5e 2024, is having to deal with something like that, where monsters, because generally the way most people run monsters is that monsters show up. Monster won't play your character dead. Why? Question mark. Oftentimes. Because goblins need to be doing stabbing. Assuming that you haven't broken into the goblin's home, aka the dungeon, and you're the home intruder, you're the problem. But if you're just out in the world, it's like, there's a lot of ways to just be like, these guys don't want to fight you. Because they're like, it'll be a tough fight. And some of us might die. We're not really keen on that, but we do want that gold. So we'll follow you into town, and we'll try to find a situation, an opportunity where we try to get this from you. Or maybe you guys get back into town, and you go to a shop, and you buy a whole bunch of items and walk off, and then maybe the bandits do a good stealth check. Or maybe they don't. But maybe they do a good stealth check and they realize that, now the shopkeep has all this money. Well, that guy's a lot easier to rob from than these super powerful player characters. or the player characters notice them, and now the player characters are like, okay, now what do we do? Because the moment that we're out of sight, they're definitely going to rob that shop. And they may kill that shopkeeper. And we're kind of responsible for that. So what is our next move? Do we go on the offensive? And then, again, that's when things like my karma stuff starts to tap into a campaign and be like, a lot of people don't know the situation that you're in. So if you 4 or 5 people just run into a dark alley and murder a half dozen people indiscriminately, and people are like, what? Why did you do that? And you're like, oh, well, they were going to rob us. Were they robbing you? Because we watched you run into the alleyway. Unprovoked. Well, I mean, they were planning it. Like, you know, they were eyeing us up. It was like, okay, that's not how that works. If they didn't rob you, they didn't do anything. And you create this more kind of morally complex kind of game by tracking those things. So, do I use simplified or optional encumbrance? I sometimes. Not really. Generally not. Like I said, I focus more on resource management, like my resource die thing, where it's like, oh, well, if you're just things you can carry on your back, you can carry a d6 worth of arrows, a d6 worth of rations, and we spin down from there. Rather than being like, oh, well, I carry 200 pounds of rations, and it reminds me of a game that I believe I played in. I don't think I was running this game. I was thinking about this earlier, and it's like, I don't think I was running the game. I believe I might have been running the game. I can't remember. It's so long ago. Where a player character was like, oh, well, I want arrows. And I was like, all right, well, then here's the price for buying arrows in town. This was before I was doing the resource die mechanic. It was so many years ago. They're like, great, I buy 200 arrows and a donkey to carry it. To carry them. Okay. Is that they bought 200 arrows, and I think I told them, it was like, either me or the DM were like, well, obviously you can't carry 200 arrows on you. That's an insane amount of ammunition to carry around with you. Great, I buy a donkey to carry it for me. Okay. Yeah, I guess. What are you going to do with the donkey once we get to the dungeon? Oh, I'll just tie him up outside. I was like, all right, well, the donkey's probably going to get attacked by something, but we'll see. But yeah, it is very interesting. So to do those sort of encumbrances and when you make encumbrance count. Because I feel like if you're carrying a standard amount of standard adventuring gear, I'm not going to penalize you for that. And like I said, I don't give my players enough gold in my campaign because I am a miserly dungeon master. Because gold coinage is such a problem in D&D to begin with, because getting it. So it's like, no, I need to lock up the wealth in other things. So it's like, you can get fabulous amounts of wealth, but it is a gigantic pain in the butt to do so. Like, it really becomes its own adventure to be like, how do I get this marble statue out of here? How do I get it to the city? Are we going to do that instead of doing other adventures? And it'll be like, yeah, it makes sense, but we're going to take that. The city is like, great, you guys move locations. You start a new kind of hex crawl in a different area once you get there, if you decide to set up base there because you have a bunch of money now. And, you know, that person may not be able to pay you in full there. They might have to pay you in, like, installments, because they might be like, well, I don't have 5,000 gold on me. Like, nobody has 5,000 gold on me. Like, I'm good for it. Like, I'm a very wealthy person. But as a noble, like, all my wealth is tied up in the land that I own. And so it will take me a lot of time to turn that wealth into cash money. And to convert that into liquid currency. So it's like, I can pay you it, but I'm just letting you know that this may be a thing that takes like months to do. And now, right, you put them in a situation, now they have a reason to stay in the city for a while, and maybe they're getting some monthly installment payments. Maybe they set up some interest where the guy's going to actually pay them a little bit more than what it's worth, just because they can pay it in installments, or otherwise they're not going to have anybody to sell it to. Or maybe they take a lesser price and be like, I guess we'll just sell it at this price then. Just because we want to stop dealing with this thing. So it gives you this more wealth. Like, the treasure aspect becomes a truly important portion of the gameplay. It's not just a bank account for you. And I do that stuff instead of dealing with focusing as much on the specifics of encumbrance. Makes sense. I am going to take just a short break. We're going to go next into some healing and rest rules stuff, and that's going to be our next thing, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I need to fill back up on my coffee, and then we'll probably go. I don't know. Well, honestly, is this a good place to stop? You know what? This may, we'll push one more because I realize that I'm already at about I'm approaching 2.5 hours. I'm like, well, if I take a break and come back, we'll be moving on to about 3 hours, and that's. I think honestly, this is going to be a little bit more than my voice can handle today, unfortunately. Which is good. It'll leave us there's quite a few more of these that I'm going through, so we'll be able to do this at some other time. We'll drop in, or maybe if we have some time after one of our other streams, I can jump back in here, cover a few more of these. But like I said, they're not in any particular order, so I'll just do, let's say, one more. Yeah, let's do one more, and we'll talk about the simplified healing and rest rules. And once we do that, that'll be enough for the stream, and I'll save these rests for some other time. So the only way to do that will be that you'll get keyed in on that is to, make sure that you subscribe. Got him. Promoted the channel. Got him. All right. Yeah. So obviously, if you like the content, like it. If you want to see more of this, when we do this stream, usually about once a week, maybe twice a week. We did it twice this past week. So, if you want to be notified of that, being subscribed is the best way to do it. Or you can also get over on my X/Twitter or Blue Sky. I try whenever I remember to give a notification that I'm going to go live, and you can go check this out over on YouTube. Also, if you want to see other stuff, sometimes we do some video game content over on Twitch. It's all Red Ragged Fiend, so you can find it easily over there if you want to follow that stuff. And you want to see me not be very good at video games, you can go watch that instead. So, let's do simplified healing and rest rules. So, homebrew variants to make healing and rest less or more punishing. I go back and forth about this, because I don't think the downtime rules in D&D are super great, and the 2024 revamp is not super. There's just not a lot going on it. Like, if you want it to be an important part of the game, but then they also don't really give you a reason to make downtime an important part of the game, so you do have that issue where it's like session 1, people walk out of a village into the wilderness, and 3-4 weeks later they come back and they're like some of the most powerful people in the world, and you're like, what happened? It's been like 3 weeks, guys. You're all weighted down in like rare gear and stuff because you're not using any sort of downtime mechanics. But as far as simplified healing, I like more of the grim healing, or grim resting, I should say, which is the idea that is, instead of taking a short rest being an hour, a short rest is a day, and instead of a long rest being 8 hours of sleep, it becomes like a week or something like that. I do it when I'm doing overland travel. So overland travel is different than like exploration travel. Exploration travel is that hex crawl, like we're crawling through the hexes looking for stuff. Overland travel is like we're going from point A to point B, and we're just going to see if anything happens along the way. And so when that happens in overland travel, it's like we do the same effort mechanic. So it scales with your levels. Like sometimes you get, instead of getting tired in a day, you get tired in a week of being on the road, just walking, within a month, etc., etc. So the way that it works as far as healing is like once you have that, once you fail that exhaustion or whatever it is, or you want to make a rest, instead of doing just one sleep, because we're oftentimes abstracting a lot of days of travel. Like instead of taking, and you obviously sleep every night in that, so we don't need to worry about that. We'll abstract that out a layer and be like, okay, if you guys want to we assume that like every day you guys are basically taking a short rest. That's what we're gonna essentially call that. And if you wanted a longer rest, what we would consider a long rest at that aspect, it'd be like you take a camp day. Essentially, you're like on the road. You're like we're camping up. Everybody's just taking a relaxation day from the march, just to recoup, because you can't march it all day every day. It just don't work. Our bodies aren't quite that good at long distance. Humans are real good at doing long distance stuff. We're not quite that good. So we do have to rest every once in a while. So then you set up like a camp out on the side of the road, or you stay at an inn or something, and you basically just have a downtime day. And so if you have somebody who, like I said, has one or more levels of exhaustion, they're basically kind of stuck in their room sleeping and recouping. They can't really do anything. But there are generally other people in the party. Usually there's only 1 or 2 people in the party who might have exhaustion levels the way that I run it, which means that you often have 1 to 3 people who don't have exhaustion levels. And I'm like, okay, you guys basically have some downtime. So if you guys want to do shopping, you can do shopping. If you want to work on crafting items, you can work on crafting items. If you want to, the ranger or whoever it is grabs their bow and runs off into the woods and be like, you can forage for supplies and go hunting and stuff, and you can do that. And you can recoup up some of your resource dice by wild game that you catch, or wild, berries and nuts and vegetables and all sorts of stuff that you find, roots and tubers that you find in the wilderness. And you could actually spend time coming back and doing that forage action and coming back and having a whole bunch of stuff that you can do to buffer up your camp supplies as you're doing this overland travel. Really nice. You can spend the time like getting rumors. If maybe you decide to see what's kind of going on in the area. Maybe you decide once you're doing this camp day that you want to do an adventure or something like that. So that's generally how I do that. I'm pretty okay with the healing surges as they work in 5e24, where you get half of your level back. Rounded up, right? Yeah, because you have to round up, because otherwise you would get 0 back on. Isn't that right? Or is it minimum of 1? It's round down, minimum of 1. How that works, I'm pretty sure. I think that works all right. I think it works fine. I think it makes, like I said, tracking those resources across multiple sessions becomes the same thing that we do with like inspiration. Becomes a little bit difficult. We were like, how many healing surges do I have down again? Did I write this down correctly? Did I have something? Did I accidentally take a long rest when I wasn't supposed to? Those sorts of things. And did I get the right amount back? Did I forget to mark off things when I did healing? Those kind of things are still an issue. I'm okay generally with everybody getting all their HP back on the rest. Does it make a lot of narrative sense that like, oh, I had a little sleep and now I'm fully healed up? No. But I also, one of the ways that I deal with a lot of stuff like that is player characters are very effective in the short term. And in the moment, they are extremely good at what they do. They're extremely good at combat, extremely good at exploration, extremely good at doing all those sorts of things. That's why when any sort of dungeon master, game master asks me about like, oh, I'm really struggling with running my game because my players are like running roughshod over my campaigns, it's like, well, you're probably letting them rest too much. And they're like, well, I mean, like they go a full day and then they rest, and it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, then you're probably not throwing enough encounters at them. This is when you look at what is D&D's, I always forget what it is, and so I'm just gonna look it up real quick. What's recommended encounters per day? So the 2014 one was what they say controversial 6 to 8 encounters per day, and then your 2024 ones are more like 3 to 4 challenging encounters. Which by that setup means that you basically should be splitting up adventuring days between multiple sessions, for the most part. And you're like, 6 to 8 is a ton of encounters, and I was like, yeah, you guys missed the point. you're just like, combat already takes so long, and you know, combat takes anywhere from like 45 minutes to an hour and a half, and I have to make these big combats. It's like because you're trying to make one combat. Instead of taking your game and making one combat, take that one combat and split it into 5 smaller combats. Like I said, player characters are really good at dealing with things in the short term. So if you only force them to fight with one encounter, they go Nova and they throw everything at that encounter. But if they have to fight 5 smaller encounters in the day, that means that every spell slot they use, every ability they use, is one that they can't use in one of these later combats, and they don't know what those later combats are going to be. That's where, when I talk about like D&D at its core is a resource management game. When you only have them do like one big fight in a day or whatever, you're not forcing them to manage the resources. You're not enforcing them to engage with the game system the way that it's supposed to be engaged with. You have to make them manage those resources. That's why those things like the bandits that I talked about just harrying you, maybe they run into range, and sometimes I'll do this, like one of my favorite things to do that's super, super awful for players if they've never had to deal with this before, is to be like, oh, there are just goblins. There's a pack of goblins, and they're just following you through the forest. Every once in a while, they get close enough to, you know, sling rocks and shoot arrows at whoever's standing in the back. And the moment you guys turn around to roll initiative, they run off. And they just harry you again and again and again, denying those player characters that pitched battle thing. That's the thing that makes like horse archers in history so useful. Why things like Mongols were really, really successful, because they show up really quickly, they harry you, they do a bunch of damage, and they wheel away, and you usually can't catch up to them. Because, especially like goblins where they have like the bonus dash or disengage action that they can do, they're actually pretty quick, they're easy, they're small, they get bonuses to stealth, they're hard to find, they disperse and they come back together. And having to fight that, it's kind of like Tucker's Kobolds, but different. It's this idea that be like, even low level threats can be an extremely big threat when they are persistent. And they don't allow the player characters to use their strengths. By having a bunch of goblins that show up, that just follow you, and they wait till you go to sleep, they wait till you take your heavy armor off, that's when they decide to attack you. They try to keep you up all night with noise. They do these like terrible, more like guerrilla war tactics on you, where they just make being around them kind of a miserable experience. And then it's like, okay, as a player character, at some point you're like, the rangers, hopefully you have a ranger with you, or a druid or somebody who's like, I cast Pass Without a Trace, and we just try to run away from these guys, and we try to hide from them, rather than deal with them. And then it changes how you play the game very much, but denying them rest really, really hard, forcing them to choose when to use their spell slots, much more important when they know it's more likely that they're going to have additional encounters. This is also the thing where it's like, people are like, oh, 6 to 8 encounters is a ton of encounters. Encounters don't mean combat. Encounters mean like scenes, essentially. That could be like a gorge that you have to get across. That could be a puzzle you have to figure out. That can be some random traders you come across, a trade caravan you come across on the road that you can stop and talk to and barter with. That's a scene too. That's an encounter that technically you can be successful. All of these things are things in which you can spend spells in. You can spend limited resources in. You can be like, oh, well, I'm gonna cast Charm Person on this random trader I came across because he'll give me a good deal because we're gonna be friendly, give me a bonus on all my checks, and then by the time we're gone and that, you know, the Charm Person wears off, they're gonna be like, dang it, those people just fleeced me. Now again, that's where my karma system kicks in, but it's like you could do it, and especially if you're in dire need. And having a lot of smaller encounters will change the way that both your group plays and how your group will be like, oh, we're really challenged by doing death by 1,000 cuts rather than trying to be like one big meaty fist always trying to smash down on them. If you really just cut at them in a lot of different ways, the game becomes a lot more challenging. Similarly, one of the common advice that I give out for something like this is if you're struggling to challenge parties in your game, your group, is that stop attacking hit points and stop attacking AC. Most people will be like, oh, well, you know, I can't hit these characters because they've all got, you know, we have this problem in one of the campaigns I play in, that RME campaign that I play in, where one of our characters has a really, really good AC, and he can bump up his AC. So he's in the 20s consistently, floating around in the 20s depending on whatever his specific loadout is at that moment. And now he's still a warlock, so he doesn't have the greatest hit points in the world, because his hit die is kind of small. But the DM was talking to me and lamenting it because we kind of have a little bit of that back and forth. Be like, oh, well, you know, it's really hard to attack this character because they've got such high AC. And I was like, well, stop attacking his AC. Make him make saving throws about stuff. Knock him down. Make him prone. Give all your guys advantage on him. Like, there are lots of other things you can do. Like, he's dog at strength saving throws. Like, give you guys a bunch of monsters that knock things prone. Like the classic wolves. Wolves just knock you prone. Now, you can base that off the attack, but you could also be like, I'm the DM, I can do whatever I want. They're going to use their entire action instead of trying to hit you to force you to make the strength saving throw. Instead, they're just trying to drag you to ground. That way they can maul you. And then combat becomes a lot more difficult. So if you don't always focus on the thing they're good at and the things that they want to do. So if they're really good at combat, sometimes you give them less combat. You're like, good, you put all your D&D character eggs in one basket. Great, now you're lost in the woods. What do you do now? Are you guys gonna die out here because you can't make food? Because none of you decided to take survival? Will you starve and suffer from dehydration out in the desert? Are you totally lost because you don't know how to get anywhere because you're all people who decided not to get a guide as you traveled across the desert and none of you are trained in survival and have no idea what you're doing? And you went on a fool's errand, and now you will die a fool's death. So you change up the ways the game is done. Like I said, if you players build their characters generally to doing just a few very specific things very well. Now that's why a very balanced party, when you have different characters who all focus on a very few different things that they do well, that means that the party in general is pretty good at most things. But they're not really good at any one thing usually, except usually combat. And so that's why you have to change things up. That's a huge tangent away from simplified healing and resting, I suppose. The only thing that I think that I have thought about adding to my game that I haven't done yet, as far as simplified healing and stuff is that one of the things that's always been kind of percolating, it's on the back burner, it's simmering. It's in the simmer space in the back of the brain. Just, it's very fragrant, effervescent. I can smell it cooking all the time back there. I think about, what if healing is temporary hit points? And the only way to actually get normal hit points back is by resting. And you're like, well, and because functionally temporary hit points and hit points are roughly the same. In most temporary hit points, the way that 5e in 2024 does it is that you just get those you have temporary hit points unless it tells you otherwise, until essentially you complete a long rest. Now sometimes it'll be like, oh, you get the temporary hit points, but you lose them at the end of whatever the spell is, which might only have a concentration for like 10 minutes or something like that, or an hour or whatever it is. So that's a very specific circumstance. But in general, if it doesn't tell you a time frame, then the time frame is a day. So if you can do that, and then you're like, but temporary hit points also have some other weird stuff in it, like you can't stack temporary hit points. So when you use a healing spell, they need to be out of temporary hit points before you use it again for them, or they need to be low enough that whatever you roll will be higher than whatever they have. And you're like, it's a bit weird. It nerfs healing a little bit, which is not necessarily terrible, especially if you are of the column of dungeon masters or groups that really struggle in the combat aspect, really taking away in combat healing is a lot more difficult. Makes things a lot more difficult. Unless it's hit die healing. If it says spend a hit die, I would say then yeah, that's probably normal hit points. Which is like how I think the healer's kit works now. How something no, I guess I don't think Stick of Wind works like that, right? I don't think it says you spend a hit die. That's the old stuff. Other editions of the game do that. Not this one. So I might... This is why it's in the back burner. That's why it still needs to percolate, where I'm like, does something like Stick of Wind, does that give you real hit points? I don't know. Probably not, because you get it back every short rest. Not long rest. That's why that stuff needs to percolate back there. Still. I'm like, I'm not sure about a lot of stuff. I still need to think about this a lot more. But the idea, that's why I've toyed with it. I mean, like, oh, well, that's temporary hit points. Also, it becomes much more dangerous if you get higher and higher levels. Combat will already become more and more difficult because you won't be able to stack those temporary hit points. You'll also start getting into the area where combat becomes exceedingly deadly and dangerous. Once you start getting into the type of spells where it's like, even though they started low level too, like the old 2014 sleep spell, not the new one, because the new one's just the same, but the old one was like, it's dependent on how many hit points you have. So if you're doing temporary hit point magical healing, they might have low hit points, which means you might actually put creatures to sleep. You might put player characters to sleep if you have a bad guy who has a sleep spell. Which is a spell that basically never gets cast on player characters. You can actually make that as a viable combat option for a bad guy. But you also get into those higher level spells where it's like, hey, do you have 100 hit points or not? Ooh, you don't have 100 hit points? You're dead. Now those things become incredibly lethal. I mean, they're already lethal, but now it's like super, super lethal. And now counterspell, things like counterspell become way more important. It'd be like, you have to counterspell. If you know that the person has Finger of Death, Power Word, Kill, they have Disintegrate, you have to make sure that they can't get those spells off. Because if they do, you're gonna go. You guys gonna go. Somebody gonna die. Which is, you know, that's a struggle in high level combat. Is the PC, the balance of high level combat is already weird, and the player characters get really, really powerful really quickly. So being able to tamp that down by focusing them down on their healing is another way to do that. It also means that they'll need to spend more hit dice on short rest. Which is good, because oftentimes, I know, at least, I mean, my practical experience of me and the people that I played with, numerous though they may be, is that a lot of people don't like to do short rests or don't like to spend hit points. They want the magical healing most of the time over using their hit die, because that's one of those weird things like potions that we like hoard the resources. We're like, I don't want to use the hit dice. Can you just use Gear Limbs on me instead? It's like, no, I'm not going to use a spell slot. You have hit dice. Use the hit dice. Sometimes even drink a potion over spending hit dice, which is weird. But forcing them to engage with that hit dice mechanic more. And then that's when I started, when I talked about earlier about when you start creating things that don't attack hit points. One of the things that I like to do is create effects, like weird magic effects, or give a monster a cool ability where it's like, oh, if you fail to save or whatever, it sucks a hit die from you. It doesn't do any damage to you, but it takes hit dice from you. And that's something that it could do more like a breath weapon style thing, like it's meant to hit more than one person at a time. Like an area effect kind of thing. Oh, you guys failed your saves. You failed your con save. The two of you failed your con saves. Each of you mark off a hit die. You lose a hit die. And you're like, what damage should we take? You don't take any damage, but you lose a hit die. And then if you get hit with that multiple times, suddenly you don't have any hit dice. And so even if you take a short rest, you can't heal up. And then when you take a long rest, right, you only get your half your level rounded down still. So if you're 10th level and you lost 3 hit dice in that fight because of bad rolls, and you get to a short rest and you're already down from 10 to 7, and you're like, okay, well, I need to spend 3 or 4 hit dice to get back up. Now I'm down to 6 or 7 that are spent, so I only have like 3 or 4 left. If we take another short rest, I'm probably going to be out of hit dice. If we're out of hit dice, I only get half my hit dice back when I take a long rest. The game becomes a lot more dangerous when I can't heal myself. And so they're doing that. So that's so rather than being like, well, you can only spend so many hit dice, be like, no, I'll just take hit dice away from you. That'll just be a monster ability. That'll be an effect. That'll be a trap or a hazard or an obstacle, the thing or something that you need to sacrifice to open this puzzle door. You do the classic, like, you need to, instead of they have the bowl with the sacrificial knife, and you're like, I need to cut my hand and drip blood into it, and be like, okay, that's cool, yeah, you do that. You don't take any hit point damage, but you do lose a hit die to do that, and you are granted interest to it. As soon as the next player approaches the door slams shut again. Now we all have to sacrifice hit dice to get in there, unless we can figure out some sort of weasel way to get in there. Maybe they grab their the extendo pole, and be like, once the door's open, I shove the extendo pole in there, or the immovable rod, so it can't close the door, so we can sneak in behind it while the door's open, and then click it out and take the rod with it. And that's what I want. I want my players to do clever play like that, and be like, oh, you found a cool way to cheat out the system. That's great. Perfect. That's what I want you to do. That would have been bad if you all lost hit dice. I'm glad that you found a way to get around that. Super cool. Absolutely. Love it. 100%. But yeah, that's it for simplified healing and resting rules. I think that kind of covers what I want to do. So I am still kind of percolating about, like, maybe I could do temporary hit points. It's weird because temporary hit points are just kind of a sometimes thing in 5e 2024. Not a lot of characters get them very often, and often only under very specific circumstances or spells that happen. It'll be interesting. Like I said, I need to percolate on it, or maybe in a one shot or something I run in the future. I'll investigate that and see how it really works. It'll need to be a higher level one shot. It can't be like a second or third level. I need to be a high enough level where that will make a difference. Things to think about. But I think that's where we're gonna stop today. Yeah, we're approaching. We're getting closer and closer to 3 hours, so I think that's where we're gonna stop. My throat's good and toasty at this point. Getting a little fried. So, thank you for hanging out with me. Hopefully you enjoyed some of this homebrew stuff. Oh, you just got here. Well, you just missed it, unfortunately. Sorry there, but you'll be able to pick it up, and the VOD will be available, so you can just sling it on back to the beginning and finish it. But we only got about honestly, we only got about a third of the way through this. I figured this would take us a long time, but you know how it goes. I get on some tangents and we talk for a bit, but thanks for hanging out. Hopefully you got something out of this homebrew, getting an idea of how I judge homebrew and house rules, about, like, is this encouraging the type of play that I want, or is it not? Understanding the design of the game, and when I affect that design of the game, is it for good or bad, or is this going to, as is the case generally, there's going to be some sort of weird unintended consequence that I didn't know about. That might be some sort of boon, or it might be some sort of bane. We don't know until we get in there and start playing, and that's why you do playtesting, essentially, is to understand what's happening. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me today. I may stream later this weekend over on Twitch. I haven't decided yet. We'll see. Gotta kind of figure out what my schedule's gonna be like for this weekend and how everything's gonna shake out. But so if you want to check it out over there, I'll try to make sure to throw up an announcement. If you don't follow me on Twitch, up on X or Blue Sky, probably, that I'm gonna do anything. Otherwise, we'll probably hit this back next week. I may do another midweek stream. I don't know. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe, and then you'll get notifications for it. Make sure that you hit the notification bell, and you'll get the notification of when I'm going to go live, and we'll move on from there. But thanks for hanging out, guys. Sorry if you got here late. Luckily, the video will still be here, even though I am not. And I'll talk to you guys later. Alright? Bye.